My name's Long Picnic, and using no data, no simulations, and no research at all, here are my thoughts on the 2021 fantasy football season. And that was the last scripted line of this video. Yeah, there's no writing, no editing, and none of that usual polish you see around this channel. It's just going to be me, my thoughts, and this microphone. I usually do heavy scripting and editing for all the videos I make. You see my minute-long starting 5 NBA videos now if you've stuck around the channel. Those usually have a full script written for them and full simulations to write that up and full editing and stuff like that for the entire video. It's a whole process, but today, on today's date, the 1st of April, we're going to be doing a different kind of video where I just spout nonsense into the microphone and you guys hopefully listen. I don't think anyone will because it's going to end up being like a couple hours probably. We'll just see how that goes. If you're listening, I appreciate it obviously. I don't know why I'm telling you this. You just want to hear the rankings probably if you clicked on the video. But this is just what other fantasy YouTubers do. And so I figured I'd make myself, more like the general trend of fantasy football YouTubers on YouTube because none of the other guys really have simulations or they don't do it in under 5 minutes. And so I figured I'd throw all the quick pick Nick stuff out the door, get long pick Nick in here. No data, no simulations, no speed at all, just taking our time. Got a couple of bottles of water here just in case I need to drink them over time because this is going to be a while. But yeah, let's just get started here. I just completely ripped the ESPN 2021 rankings and projections from their website because this is long picnic. We're lazy here, obviously. So we'll just go through that, see how that ends up, and I'll give you my thoughts and feelings on all that. And something else that the other fantasy YouTubers do is ask for subscribers at this point in the video, I believe. And so if you feel so inclined, here's my shameless plug to subscribe to Quick Pick Nick so that you can hear more daily fantasy content that's much better and far more scripted, edited, high quality than what we're doing here. But yeah, daily fantasy content 3 to 4 times a week for whatever sport's happening. Right now it's obviously basketball. When the football season gets back, it'll be football. We also have some sort of highly edited videos coming out every so often. I've got one in the works. It's going to hopefully come out sometime in April. But it's going to be similar to that Fandometer video if you were around back then, where I basically told every team which team they should support in Super Bowl 55, I think it was. Yeah, it was 55 between the Chiefs and Tampa a few months back. I basically just ran through, mathematically speaking, the perfect team for every team to support in the Super Bowl. And so if you haven't checked that video out, I'd recommend it. I think that's my best work so far. Another one of those types of videos with the high editing, high quality, completely customized things like that, and bunch of cool graphics and pretty looking things with all the bells and whistles. That'll be coming down hopefully sometime in April if I can actually get my stuff together and just buckle down and get to it. But right now I'm giving you the rankings of the 2021 fantasy football players for everyone, really, all positions. And I feel like I've stalled long enough to get the point across for how long it usually takes for an average fantasy YouTuber to actually get into their videos, unlike Quick Picnic. There's Long Picnic, obviously, unreflective of my other videos where I finish everything in a minute. We're already at 3.5 at this point or so. And so, obviously a different kind of thing, but here we are on the 1st of April doing a different kind of thing. Let's get started. At quarterback, ESPN has Josh Allen as the top player for 2021 fantasy football, and I have no idea how he ends up as number one. I figured Patrick Mahomes would be there. Or maybe Deshaun Watson. I guess Deshaun Watson is sort of questionable right now. The more I look at it, the more it kind of makes sense now that I'm looking down the list here. But Josh Allen just doesn't seem like the top guy for 2021. I know he's a fantasy football machine because he ends up getting, I think he was averaging like a rushing touchdown a game or something absurd like that last season. But he usually ends up rushing a lot, getting a lot in the end zone. But I think that the Bills aren't exactly going to be pushing him that hard this season, considering that he's their bell cow and that the Bills Mafia should know at this point that Josh Allen is their guy and they can't really let anything happen to him. I think we're going to see a drop-off in rushing touchdowns for him maybe. I do think that he'll still score a bunch of fantasy points. He's got what? He's projected for 23.4 fantasy points per game next season. And so I'm not exactly sure if that's realistically going to happen. Maybe he'll get around 20 fantasy points per game on average, maybe 21, but 23.5 seems rather high for Josh Allen, especially on the Bills. I mean, they still got Stephon Diggs, they still got Cole Beasley, but their run game is pretty much absent. They might try to fill that in the draft, the upcoming draft, which is also Kind of funny and ironic how I'm filming this right before the draft, so it's going to be outdated in a week. But that's the point of this April 1st year with Long Picnic. You might see a return of the Long Picnic after the draft. Who knows? If this video ends up being fun and something I want to do more of, we'll see. But as for Josh Allen, getting sidetracked already, I'm sure that's going to happen a few times here. I don't think Josh Allen should be the top spot. Maybe top 3, but I don't think that he beats Patrick Mahomes, who, perfect segue, by the way, into Patrick Mahomes, who's ranked second on this list. His projection entails of 23.2 fantasy points per game, not far below Josh Allen, only a fifth of a fantasy point per game below him, and so I think that's pretty reasonable. I think that Patrick Mahomes does belong at 23.2. I think their projection here is pretty spot on. I do believe that we'll see a similar sort of production out of Patrick Mahomes as we saw in 2020. The Chiefs managed to get most of their team back. I think Sammy Watkins ended up leaving, but beside that, they got Tyreek Hill back. They got Travis Kelce. They're going to have CEH. They're going to have a lot of the players back. They don't have an O-line still. That's definitely a concern. And so maybe Patrick Mahomes getting hurt. I don't want to speak that into existence, obviously. I'd love to see everyone I'd love to see everyone kill it in the NFL, but that O-line is definitely a concern. Maybe Patrick Mahomes getting absolutely crushed under center there is going to be his main issue. But as long as he can avoid that and that stay mobile, stay out of the pocket a little bit, and make throws on the move, which we saw plenty of throughout 2020 and 2019 for that matter, I think he'll be fine as long as he can stay healthy throughout the entire season. He's definitely a great pick in both daily fantasy and long-term fantasy and stuff like that. I was thinking maybe doing a mock draft with myself later. Another Long Picnic video where you just go round by round, speaking of, because I'm thinking about that. Patrick Mahomes would probably be the top quarterback in that draft, but that's something completely different. Moving on from Patrick Mahomes, ESPN's got Kyler Murray at number 3. His projection is 22.4 fantasy points per game. And I'm not exactly sure how to feel about that. I think that's reasonable. I think that Kyler Murray could be a top 5 quarterback, especially considering all the upgrades Arizona's making in the team. They got J.J. Watt. I'm pretty sure they got a couple other weapons on the offense, too. They still got D-Hop. I think that the Cardinals are going all in this season, and they're trying to win big. They're trying to go to the playoffs. They're trying to win a Super Bowl right now. And with that being said, I think they're going to do as much as they can to give Kyler the weapons and the potential that he needs in order to make a run for this thing in 2021. And so I think that top 5 is not an overreaction, not an exaggeration by any means. I think that he could very well reach that 22 fantasy points per game mark, especially since he is another mobile quarterback like Josh Allen. I think that he might not get as much rushing potential now that Arizona knows what they have. And since they're going all in, if Kyler Murray gets reckless with his body and starts to run all over the place, twists a hamstring, hurts his knee, tears an ACL, I don't want to speak these things into existence, but we have to acknowledge that that's maybe going to happen with someone who runs so much and finds himself in the end zone so often. You've got to wonder if that's going to be, lessened next season or even stopped by the Cardinals. They tell Murray, we understand that you're a running guy, you're a rushing guy, you can run all over the place if you want, but they might need him to slow down. And if they do, his projection will obviously drop. But I think that he will still have those legs, still have that speed that he needs. And he very well might reach that 22 fantasy points per game. I think it might be a bit high, but he's definitely a top 5 quarterback in my mind. Next up, we got Deshaun Watson, and this is an interesting one. There's still the allegations going around about him being an absolute disgusting person at the time of the recording here. But regardless of that, if none of that is real and he ends up getting dismissed of all that, he'll play again. If all of that is real, hopefully he never plays another game in his life and he pays for what he's got to do. But let's just assume that he's going to be playing in 2021 with some team. It's still not clear if he's going to end up back with Houston. I mean, there was that whole disagreement there, and they seem on completely non-amicable terms. I don't know if that's a word, but they seem like they're far beyond repair. He's just completely separated himself from the organization at this point. I couldn't imagine him going back to the Texans, honestly. Although I don't exactly know where he would go because the Texans seem very adamant about keeping him around. I guess I could see a holdout in this situation where Deshaun Watson is completely refusing to play for the Texans and the Texans are completely refusing to trade him, which would be pretty bad for both ends, but it seems like they're not really willing to trade for anything for Deshaun Watson, so he might end up on the sideline. But assuming all that is not true, and assuming that he ends up with the Texans again and plays a full season for 2021, I think that he has potential. With the Texans, I don't know how much potential that could be. It's definitely capped. They lost Will Fuller, I'm pretty sure. They've lost DeAndre Hopkins a couple of years ago, and so he really doesn't have the weapons he needs. The run game, they got David Johnson for DeAndre Hopkins somehow, but that's pretty much the only facet that he'll be able to rely on is David Johnson. He did pretty well last season, not extraordinarily. It's such that he'll be able to carry the team, but I think that DeAndre Hopkins doesn't have the weapons he needs to be a top 5 quarterback, and considering he might not even play this season, I don't think that he's worth risking it in those earlier drafts if everything's not resolved by then. If the sexual assault allegations, if that lawsuit isn't settled by then, or if he hasn't agreed to terms with the Texans again, I don't think that he's worth a top 5 pick because it's just a big question mark. If he ends up on a different team with a bunch of weapons, something like, I don't know, who still needs a quarterback? Like if the Jets trade for him, they got Crowder and they're probably going to build. I think that that'd be worth a look to get a top 5 quarterback there, because they're gonna, if they take Deshaun Watson somehow, they'll be able to build up and get some weapons in the draft instead of focus on Zach Wilson, and so that might be a good pick. But Deshaun Watson, as it is right now, I'd try to steer clear of him if you can. But if he ends up back with the Texans, he will do well. Obviously, like he did last season, he's a once-in-a-generation type quarterback. He is the guy for any organization he's going to go to. And so I think that, what's he got? His projection of like 21 or so. I think that's pretty reasonable. The question marks surrounding him really just dissuade me from putting him any higher, putting him in the top 5 even. But enough about that. Moving on to Dak Prescott, who just got his bag that he's been trying to get for forever at this point. It honestly seemed like the Cowboys were never going to get it done with Dak. It seemed like that was going to go on for forever and for as long as Dak played in the league. It was just kind of a meme at this point where Dak wasn't getting signed to a contract. But here we are where Jerry's opening up his wallet and spending on their franchise guy. They're going with Dak, and they're going to be trying to make a run with him. And in the NFC East, it's very possible that they can, since they have their weapons. They have Dak Prescott back. I think that they might be the best team in the NFC East. I say that questionably with the Washington football team, who still don't have a name, acting as a couple of contenders in that division there with the Cowboys and the football team. But for the most part, I think the Cowboys have some potential here. They might be able to make a run here. They can't go 8-8 again because the season's 17 games, and so no more 8-8 Cowboys, unfortunately. Maybe a 7-8, or wait, that's not how math works. What is it? An 8-9 or a 9-8 season, or even 8-1 if they're really attached to that sort of record that they've seemed to be gravitating around for the past decade almost. But with Dak Prescott back, and assuming he's fully healed, there's no way to tell how his injury went. That was a completely gruesome injury we saw back in the regular season. I'm sure many of you saw it live, or at least on a recording on Twitter or something like that. Pretty bad stuff, to be honest about it, to be sort of underrating it. It's pretty bad, but I think that if he can come back and if he can make it all the way back, then he'll be at the same level he was at the beginning of the season in 2020. And at the beginning of 2020, he wasn't really a bad quarterback. He was kind of up there with the better quarterbacks. He maybe not Patrick Mahomes level, or I'd even put Josh Allen level at that point, or Kyler Murray level. Like he might not be a top 3 guy, but he was slinging the ball out there with Amari Cooper. He still got CeeDee Lamb back there. I don't exactly remember their tight ends off the top of my head here, but they've still got some tight ends. I think he can make a run here, and I think that, what's his projection? His projection of about 21 fantasy points per game for 2021, an average like that. I think that's very reasonable. And if he's healthy and able to play the same that he was in 2020 without any reservation, I think that 21 fantasy points per game isn't asking for much from Dak Prescott. If you take him as a top 5 quarterback, I think that's pretty reasonable. Moving on to Lamar Jackson, he's an interesting one, to say the least. He was There were some games last season. I had him in my main league last season in 2020. I had Lamar Jackson as a quarterback, and there were definitely highs and lows with Jackson. He had some games where he would score, somewhere in the tens range and not even break that 20-point range, and games that he should have dominated in really. And so sometimes he would score 15 or so, 15 to 20 points, and then other times he'd score 25 to 30. It was really touchdown dependent, I think, for Lamar Jackson whenever he decided to be a rushing quarterback. But I think that the main thing for Lamar Jackson and the Ravens last season was to get Jackson into that passing role as a passing quarterback. I don't know why they tried to force that so much. Lamar Jackson clearly thrives as a rushing quarterback and a dual threat option. But for some reason, the Ravens seemed determined to have Lamar Jackson become one of those Tom Brady types that just sits in the pocket and makes dimes of throws. And I don't think Lamar Jackson needs to be that. If Lamar Jackson can sort of switch back to that running and dual threat mobile quarterback again in 2021 like he was in 2019, we've got a chance here to get some huge points because he's going to score a lot of touchdowns. It's just the idea that he's going to switch back to that sort of role is very unclear right now. The Ravens, they saw what happened last season. They're probably going to reassess, figure it out. If they switch their game plan back to what it was in 2019, where they had that huge success until they got steamrolled by a hot Tennessee Titans and Ryan Tannehill team, I think that Lamar Jackson has a chance to get back to that point. I think that if they do that, if they do make that switch, he could be a top 5 quarterback, maybe even top 3, because he's going to be getting a lot of rushing yards. But if we see another version of 2020 Lamar Jackson, which seems far more likely at this point, I would put him in the top. I think exactly where he is a pretty good projection. It's around 21 fantasy points per game. I think that they got that one pretty right. Moving on now, we got Aaron Rodgers, who's way too far down this list in my opinion. He's around 20 fantasy points per game is his projection right now, and I just completely disagree with this one. I think that Aaron Rodgers is going to be a top 3 quarterback at the very minimum. I think that he could be placed right up there with Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Aaron Rodgers. I'd say are my top 3 fantasy football quarterbacks right now. And the reason is because Aaron Rodgers can really just make anything happen that he wants. He throws. I think he's the best throwing quarterback in the league right now. Like obviously Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, they've got a bunch of talents and they're very multifaceted quarterbacks. But as for just throwing the ball on target, where it needs to be, when it needs to be, I think Aaron Rodgers is the best in the NFL, undisputed. And so if he's able to continue that, which there haven't been any signs of him slowing down, even for however old he is, what is he, getting up to 40 at this point? I have no idea how old Aaron Rodgers is, to be honest. But if he continues to do what he's done, and I think he will continue to do what he's done, he's a top 3 quarterback for sure. I think that he's far too low on this list. That he's going to have Devontae Adams again. Big old Bob Tunyon's coming back. They re-signed Aaron Jones, I'm pretty sure. They still got A.J. Dillon. They've got a very, very extensive offensive weaponry available for Aaron Rodgers. They just need to sign a few more options on the defense maybe, or I don't exactly know what they're looking for, but they've got a lot of weapons for Aaron Rodgers at this point, and I think that he'll be a top 3 fantasy quarterback for sure next season. Next up, we got Tom Brady right below Aaron Rodgers, and his projection. Sorry, I got to lean in every time. I don't want. Yeah, he's at 21 fantasy points per game. Yeah, I got to lean in every time, like around my microphone, because I zoomed in a lot, or zoomed out a lot, just to see all the names and one screen, hopefully, so I don't have to do a lot of scrolling, which would be annoying. But I guess leaning in and out and dead air all the time is probably more annoying, honestly. But with Tom Brady, he's projected at 21 fantasy points per game. I think that might be a bit high. We saw him throughout the regular season, and it wasn't anything spectacular. I mean, he was throwing Tom Brady throws. He was doing pretty well for a 42-year-old or 43-year-old. He's really getting up there in age. But I honestly think Tom Brady might play till he's 50. That TB12 treatment is not slowing down for him at all. He's just pumping out Lombardis at this point. And so I think that Tom Brady is going to be able to have success with Tampa Bay. I think that they'll do well as a team. It's just he has no rushing potential, and they just got Leonard Fournette back, I'm pretty sure. They just re-signed him, and so the run game is still intact. And so if they end up in the red zone or within the 5-yard line, that touchdown is most likely going to be going to Leonard Fournette, and so Brady won't get those points. and he's got the weapons he needs. He's got Chris Godwin, he's got Mike Evans, he's got Rob Gronkowski back. I'm pretty sure he's still got Cameron Brate there too. Leonard Fournette can even be used as a passing running back sometimes, and so he's got potential to score big and do very well with Tampa Bay again. It's just how much are they going to really use that passing game when they don't have to? I think they're going to win games. They're going to win a lot. They're probably going to make the playoffs again. Might make another run to the Super Bowl, considering they've got pretty much an identical team to their 2020 team. But it's really a question of whether they're going to use Tom Brady throughout the whole season as they would in the playoffs. And my answer to that question is no, I don't think they will. I think that they'll play more passively. We saw that in 2020 where throughout the regular season, he wasn't really hitting his max potential. He was sort of a mid to low tier guy. And so I think there's a little high for Tom Brady. Maybe averaging 18 fantasy points per game is more reasonable. But yeah, I think that this projection on ESPN is really high for what Brady showed last season. Now moving on to Justin Herbert, who's actually one of the most interesting quarterbacks to talk about, I think, in 2021, because he had a huge 2020 season out of nowhere after they shoved a pencil through Tyrod Taylor's lung. Justin Herbert got his chance, and he just completely showed up. I think he was maybe the third quarterback to be taken. There was Tua, Joe Burrow, and then I think Herbert was third, but he's the first 2020 rookie, now second year on this list. And so I think that his placement is relatively... Sorry, I had to lean in again. I should just zoom this in. Yeah, I should just zoom this in. What am I doing here? We're being inefficient. I think that his placement here is pretty warranted. He's got 19.5 fantasy points per game on his ranking, and I think that's fine. Maybe even low for him. He did really well for the games that he played last season. A lot of 20-plus pointers for him. He's still got the weapons he needs. He's still got Keenan Allen. I'm pretty sure Mike Williams is back. They've got a few running backs there. I don't know if anyone's reliable enough, which is actually probably a good thing for Herbert's fantasy outlook since he'll be throwing the ball more. But yeah, I really like Justin Herbert. I think that he belongs maybe higher than Tom Brady and definitely in the top 10, maybe even in the top 7. I'd go as high maybe. Maybe I'd put him at 7th if I were to make a ranking. But yeah, I do think that Justin Herbert has great potential for next season. Now, Russell Wilson at number 10 is an interesting one. Because similarly to Deshaun Watson, well, okay, not that similarly because he's not a alleged monster right now. He's just unhappy with his team. But if Russell Wilson doesn't end up on the Seahawks, whatever team he ends up on, I think that he'll be able to strive. He'll be able to have huge success on and do very well. Because I saw a stat the other day that showed that Russell Wilson is one of the most sacked quarterbacks. For basically the entire time that he's played football, he's been in the top 5 sacks per game among quarterbacks across the league, just per team. And so he's been getting hit a lot, and he's been getting up a lot too, which is impressive in its own right. His projection is right around, that's like 19.5 fantasy points per game. I think that's very reasonable for Russell Wilson. I'd honestly bump that up a couple points maybe. Give him 21.5 fantasy points per game on average. I'm pretty sure that's a reasonable estimate considering that he's not exactly a mobile quarterback like Josh Allen is, but he can move. He might not score a touchdown, but he's got the weapons he needs, and he can move out of the pocket, throw across his body, and complete passes to DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett's still around. They got that Moore. It's not DJ Moore. It's a different kind of Moore, but they got a Moore there who's pretty good too. And so I think there's definitely a reasonable projection at number 10. I think he belongs higher even, maybe even within the top 5. If we're being a little crazy here, but at least top 10, definitely top 7, I would say, maybe top 5 if we're getting lucky. Moving on to Jalen Hurts, who's at number 11 here. His projection is at 19, and I was pretty surprised to see Jalen Hurts here because that's something I haven't really thought about with Carson Wentz going to Indianapolis. Is that Jalen Hurts is probably the guy for Philadelphia going forward, and I'm not really sure how I feel about that. We didn't really see a lot of Jalen Hurts last season. He had some incredible games where he scored a lot of fantasy points. I'm pretty sure he had like a 30-pointer at one point there. But he also had some bad games, and I remember taking him a few times in FanDuel lineups where he didn't really show out or show up enough where I needed him to. And so there really isn't enough definitive data to go off of. Well, we're not using data here. Anyways, it's long picnic after all. But there isn't really enough we saw last season of Jalen Hurts in 2020 to make this kind of bet on him and take him at 11th. make him the 11th best quarterback in 2021. I just don't think that's true. That's not a safe pick. He could very well get that 19 points per game mark. It's just we didn't really see enough of an indication of that last season in order to persuade me that that's going to happen in 2021 as well. And so for that, I think that a more conservative projection would be around 18 fantasy points per game. I think that's completely reasonable for Jalen Hurts. He doesn't really have a great team around him. He's still in Philadelphia. He is mobile though, so he'll probably get you some solid rushing yards, maybe a rushing touchdown every once in a while. But yeah, I think 19 is a bit too high, even though he's mobile. He's not mobile enough to make the Eagles a solid contender. So I think that's enough to be said about that. Number 12, we got Cam Newton, and I'm actually pretty big on Cam Newton right now, considering that they re-signed him, and the Patriots have just been signing everybody. They've been making it rain on all sorts of people this season. And so they've made some huge moves in the offseason. They got Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith as tight ends. They signed back Trent Brown for their O-line. They've got a stronger O-line. They've got a stronger tight end core. They're probably going to draft some sort of offensive player in the draft, hopefully, so that they can get even more of that. They've still got James White. They re-signed him. They've still got Sonny Michel and their rookie running back from last season. I don't exactly remember his name, but I think that Cam is going to be significantly better this season. He had some huge games last year, too, with a couple rushing touchdowns. And one of them, I remember pretty vividly, I took Cam Newton in one lineup where he scored two or three rushing touchdowns and just scored massive fantasy points. And so I think that Cam Newton is definitely worth taking this season. I'd put him in the top 10 if it were up to me, really. He's gonna be a very mobile quarterback. He's gonna have the options with the two shiny new tight ends on the team. And so I think Cam is underrated here. I'd definitely bump him up to maybe top 10, maybe top 8. But yeah, I think that's enough said about him. Ryan Tannehill, we've got at 13, and this is probably a pretty reasonable placement for Ryan Tannehill. He's got 17.7 on his projection for fantasy points per game. And with that being said, I think that that's very reasonable for Ryan Tannehill. Maybe a little bit more, but there really isn't anything special about Tannehill himself. I think it's more about the team surrounding him with A.J. Brown, Corey Davis. I don't really remember if A.J. Brown and Corey Davis are both coming back. I know Corey Davis he had a whole free agent thing going on, and I don't know if that was resolved with the Titans or not. But he's got a pretty solid receiving core. The Patriots stole Jonnu Smith, though, so I don't exactly know how they're going to do in the tight end department there. They've still got Derrick Henry, though. And as long as they have Derrick Henry, I think Tannehill is going to be a viable quarterback because he'll be able to rely on him whenever he needs just to pick up a first down. Because Derrick Henry is an absolute monster. Always has been, always will be, I think. And so I think that we'll be able to rely on Ryan Tannehill to get that solid 18 point per game mark. I think that 13 is pretty reasonable for him. I'm just drinking my water. I got a couple bottles here, so considering that we're only at number 14 of the quarterbacks, we might be here for a while. But that's the point. It's a long picnic. We're just having fun. Number 14, we got Joe Burrow, and his projection has him at around 17 points per game. I'm not exactly sure how I feel about this one, because when we saw Joe Burrow at the beginning of last season, he was playing really well, especially for a kid on Cincinnati. He was just getting murdered. He's got a situation similar to that of Russell Wilson, where his O-line is just not protecting him at all. That's why he got hurt in the first place. But with him coming back, if the Bengals can somehow build up an O-line for him or draft some offensive linemen in the 2021 draft, I think that Joe Burrow is going to be in good shape. And I think that he'll be able to surpass that 17 point per game mark. I don't think he'll reach 20. I really don't. They just don't have enough weapons on Cincinnati's team. They don't have a run game. Their passing game is basically T. Higgins at this point, who's a rookie from last year, going to be a second year going into 2021. So I don't think that the Bengals are going to be good next season overall. But Joe Burrow in particular, he's going to complete passes. He's going to do well as long as his O-line protects him, which is still up in the air considering he got killed last season. I think that he'll be able to put up solid points if he's in the game. Moving on to Matthew Stafford at number 15. I think that this projection is criminally low. Number 15 for Matthew Stafford on the Rams is way too low. This is completely underrating him. I think that he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now. He's just consistent and reliable. And the fact that he was able to do what he was able to do with Detroit for so long and still be known as one of the better quarterbacks in the league is impressive enough. Now going to LA with Jared Goff. Jared Goff's in Detroit, God bless his soul. But moving on to the Rams with Cooper Kupp, they've got Woods there still. They still have a couple of solid tight ends with Higbee, I'm pretty sure. They've got a whole core of running backs with Cam Akers and the gang there. And so, is it Cam Akers? I know Cam Akers is on one of the LA teams, but I know that LA Rams themselves have a bunch of solid running backs still on the team. And so Matthew Stafford, for the first time really ever, is going to be surrounded by a winning team. The Rams did well last season. I'm pretty sure they made playoffs too. And so with Matthew Stafford going straight to a playoff caliber team, I think that he's going to absolutely slaughter out there. Definitely not top 15. I'd say at the very least top 10, maybe even top 8 range. I don't know if I put him any higher than that, considering that we haven't seen huge output from Matthew Stafford, but he's a really good player, and 15 is far too low for Matthew Stafford going to a brand new team. Ben Roethlisberger then at 16, they have him projected for 18 points per game. If anything, I think that's a little high. He's right around in the rankings where I think he'd be at 16. It's just I'm not exactly sure if he's still got it. Ben Roethlisberger with his multiple surgeries he's had, and the TikTok crew they got up in Pittsburgh now. I don't know exactly how good the Steelers can be next season, especially in a really tough division. They got to play the Browns twice, which is shocking to say since the Browns have never been a tough team until last year. They got the Browns twice, they got the Ravens twice, and even the Bengals. If Joe Burrow, like I said earlier, if he gets those weapons he needs and the protection he needs, he's gonna get some solid points there. And so I don't think that Ben Roethlisberger is going to be too good at all. I think 18 is his max. I somewhat agree with that projection of 18 points per game, but I think that's a max potential. I don't think he'll get any higher than that for the season. Moving on, we got Matt Ryan at 17. His projection is at 16.8 fantasy points per game. And I think sorry, I was just tapping my mic to make sure it's on. That's what I usually do at the beginning of every video, just to make sure it's recording, but I've never recorded a video for over a half hour. And so usually what I do is I like rub the microphone like that, kinda. Do a little bit of ASMR for you guys if you're out there. If anyone's still listening, honestly. I mean, I wouldn't be listening. There's a half hour into nonsense. But yeah, at the beginning of every video, I just scratch my microphone to make sure it's recording, because sometimes I accidentally unplug or don't plug in my microphone all the way, and I end up just recording a whole video and then finishing it, and I listen to it, and it's just the audio from my computer microphone, and it sounds horrible. And so I have to re-record the whole thing, and if I had to re-record this entire video, that would be a nightmare, and I don't think I could, because my voice is already getting tired now, and we're not even through with the quarterback. So let's just get going here with Matt Ryan at number 17. What did I say his projection was? 16.8 points per game. I think that's reasonable. I think that around 16 points per game is where I would put him at if I had to guess. Maybe, I think 17 actually. So what ESPN has him here is pretty good. He's still got Julio. He's still got Calvin Ridley. I'm not sure if Todd Gurley is re-signed yet or what's going on with Todd Gurley, but either way, I think 17 is pretty reasonable for him. He's got a solid receiving core. He'll be able to make those passes. Whoever's throwing the ball is going to have a good time in Atlanta. And so Matt Ryan is going to put up solid points. He's definitely not a bad pick, especially in those deeper 2-quarterback leagues, or for a cheaper daily fantasy option. He's definitely worth it, I think. Well, I can't say definitely worth it. If they put him at like $10,000, he's not going to be worth it. But for one of those cheaper guys, he'll be a pretty reliable option that'll definitely be able to put up maybe 17 to 18 points per game throughout the season with what he's got going on in Atlanta with Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones. So I don't think there's much concern over that. Moving on to Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's on a brand new team of Washington. Ryan Fitzpatrick actually had one of the most impressive plays I've ever seen. You guys remember that back when the Dolphins played the Raiders, I think it was? And one guy on the Raiders was literally just ripping his head off in the face mask. He was like grabbing all fingers through his face mask, just ripping his head 90 degrees to the right almost, probably even more, like maybe 135 degrees to the right. He was almost looking completely behind him. And Ryan Fitzpatrick just slinged that thing. Like he just threw it as far as he could, and he just said, F it. I think one of them is out there somewhere in my team. And so he just threw it, and he managed to just absolutely nail one of his guys on the sideline who got pushed out. They ended up winning that game because of that completion. But I'll always remember, he was literally just getting his head ripped off. I'm surprised he didn't get his neck snapped there. They were literally turning him around on the Raiders, they were. And, but anyways, that's not the point. The point is that Ryan Fitzpatrick should be known as Ryan Fitzmagic because he's doing magical things on the football field every time he's out there. With his new team of the Washington football team, I think that he'll be able to do even better than he did on Miami because they were trying to, fit in Tua and Fitzpatrick in that weird sort of two-time quarterback sort of thing where they put in Tua for the beginning, switched out for Fitzpatrick at the end when they actually needed to win. I think that on Washington, they'll be able to commit to him and they'll be able to use Fitzpatrick as their starter for at least this season. If they draft a guy or they bring in a younger guy, Washington will probably have them sit behind Fitzpatrick and learn from him because he is something special when he wants to be. At a projection of 17.8 fantasy points per game, I'd honestly bump that up a couple, maybe a point or two. I don't think it's too absurdly low. 18 points is, but yeah, I think Fitzpatrick is going to do well with McLaurin and Gibson there. Yeah, he'll have what he needs to do well. He's also got Logan Thomas there as the tight end, and so he's got options. I think he'll do well in Washington. Derek Carr then is the 19th option on ESPN's ranking here. He's projected for 16.6 fantasy points per game, and there's really not much I have to say here. I think that's definitely reasonable. They got Josh Jacobs in the backfield, who's going to be taking up a significant amount of time. They don't really have many receivers. I'm pretty sure they got rid of Aguilar. He left for somewhere else, and so they've still got who is it? Amari Cooper there. So that's always going to be a reliable option. But past that, there's really not much going on. Derek Carr, I don't think there's much to say about him either. So 16.5 to 17.5 is probably an accurate range for what he's going to get next season. Now, Daniel Jones at number 20, I think that this pick is rather low for him at 16.4 fantasy points per game. I think that we should bump him up at least to 18.4 fantasy points per game. Bump him up by 2 fantasy points. Put him in the top 15. I don't think he belongs in the top 10. He might, but I think he's just outside the top 10. Definitely top 15. And to tell you why, they just got Kenny Golladay, I think it was. Yeah, it was Kenny Golladay they just got on their team from Detroit, and he's definitely a special talent. They've still got Sterling Shepard, who's pretty decent. They've got Evan Engram still around. They've got Saquon in the backfield coming back. And Danny Dimes got legs. I mean, to be completely honest, Danny Dimes can move when he wants to. You saw, everyone knows from last season that clip of Daniel Jones just running down the field. No one in sight. He had a free touchdown there, just tripping over himself. But the fact that he was running that fast, I don't remember the exact stat, but he was running really fast for a quarterback. The fact that he can get up to those kinds of speeds and that he can move around like that, I never really pictured Daniel Jones as that kind of quarterback until that point. I think that shows that Daniel Jones can get you points on the ground and through the air, and with the addition of Kenny Golladay, like I said, it looks like the Giants are trying to build and maybe make a run for this thing, and so I don't think I'd count the Giants out. Maybe throw them in contention in the NFC East with Cowboys and Washington, but again, I think those are the two big teams. The Giants are still going to be lagging behind, but with Daniel Jones, I think he's going to be able to score a lot of points himself. Moving on now with Tua, we got him at 21, and his projection is at 17.5. I think that this is high, if anything. 17.5 might be a little bit high. We saw nothing to indicate that Tua is capable of consistently producing 17.5 point games. He had a pretty below average season last year. If you're a Dolphins fan, you saw nothing that would indicate that Tua is the guy going forward for your franchise. Maybe he can prove it this year with a full year in the offense and sort of learning. He was really good in college, which is obviously why I was taken so high, but at Alabama. But I think that there's nothing to show that Tua is going to score more than 17.5 fantasy points per game. I really do think that he might just be one of those college busts, and from last season alone, he really isn't reliable enough to take anywhere higher than 20, I'd say. So maybe it might be an accurate projection by ESPN here. If anything, drop him a couple spots lower, put him at 16 points per game. But yeah, I don't have huge hopes for Tua. As for Kirk Cousins, who's at 21 on the Vikings, he's got a projection of 16.4. I think that's reasonable, maybe a little bit higher. I think you'd maybe switch Tua and Kirk Cousins in this situation where you give Kirk Cousins 17.5 and Tua 16.5 because Kirk Cousins still has those weapons. He's still got Adam Thielen. He's still got Justin Jefferson is that guy. He's still got Dalvin Cook in the backfield if he needs to. And so Kirk Cousins has weapons. He's shown that he's been able to do well last season, and I think that he'll be an average quarterback, maybe more than 16.5, maybe around 18 is his max potential, I think, for next season, but he's definitely not bad. I think he's a solid pick. Baker Mayfield, moving on at 23 on this list, is definitely an interesting conversation because what we saw from Baker at the end of last season, that's like top 10 potential. That's a top 10 quarterback we saw at the end of last season for what he was scoring there. He's got a projection of 16.5, and I think that I'm really not sure on this one. I think this is one quarterback that I'm honestly completely unsure of because at the end of last season, he was showing signs of, 25-point game, 20-point game, 22-point game, 30-point game, I think was in there somewhere. But at the beginning and throughout the entire season, really, until that end there, going into playoff season, Baker was only scoring about 15 or lower points per game, and so it was really inconsistent. If he can continue what he was doing in playoffs into 2021, I think that he himself, and the Browns are both going to have great chances in the season. And so, I don't know. It depends on if you think that the Baker we saw last year can continue into 2021. I wouldn't bank on it. I think that he'll continue to have those occasional good games. I just don't know if he'll always have those good games. And so this projection at 16.5 might be a little low, but at the end of the day, I think I wouldn't put him much higher anyways. With Jared Goff at 24, moving on. He's on Detroit now, and he's got 16 points. Considering what Matthew Stafford was able to do in Detroit, and the fact that he only scored around, 18 points per game, I don't think that Jared Goff is even gonna come close to that, to be completely honest. I think that Jared Goff is gonna end up around 15 fantasy points per game with Detroit. They lost both their receivers, I think, in free agency. They've really got nothing going for them right now. They got a sick head coach, though. I mean, Dan Campbell is one of the coolest head coaches I've ever seen in the NFL. If you haven't heard him speak at all, I suggest you listen to his speech about biting off kneecaps. Personal favorite for me, but yeah, aside from the head coach, I don't think that the offense has any weapons going for it. Jared Goff is definitely a pick you want to avoid in 2021 for me. Drew Lock at 25. It seemed for a little bit there like Denver was trying to find a different quarterback. I'm not exactly sure what ended up happening with that. It seems like, before the draft at least, it seems like they're going to be going forward with him. And Drew Lock wasn't necessarily bad. He was just, he wasn't good enough. Well, I guess that's bad if you really think about it. But yeah, I think that Drew Lock should be maybe somewhere in that lower tier range. 16 fantasy points per game sounds about right for him. That's what ESPN has him at. I think that's decently accurate. Nothing more needs to be said about him. We don't really need to stretch this out anymore. Jameis Winston at 26 for New Orleans Saints. Assuming that Jameis Winston is going to be the starting quarterback for New Orleans going forward, I think that 17.5 is a pretty understandable projection for him. He's got the weapons. He's got Michael Thomas, I'm pretty sure. Is he coming back? I'm not exactly sure if Michael Thomas is coming back, but if he does, he's got Michael Thomas. He's got Jared Cook. Wait, does he? I'm not sure if he has Jared Cook. I think Jared Cook signed somewhere else. But in any case, I think that 17.5 is a reasonable projection for what Drew Brees was able to do last season, and he wasn't anything special, really, at the end of his career. He's obviously an all-timer, Hall of Famer, but for what Drew Brees did in 2021, I don't think Jameis Winston is far behind. 17.5 sounds right to me. Carson Wentz now at 27. His projection of 15.8, that sounds fair. I'd maybe be inclined to bring that up a little bit because I think he's going to do much better in Indianapolis than he did in Philadelphia, just because he's going to be back with his good head coach that he was with in Philadelphia, with the coaches and the staff that he's familiar with, and maybe get him back into his system like that. He's got a few weapons. He's got T.Y. is always going to be a great weapon for him. He's still got Michael Pittman. He's got a couple tight ends there too, and so I think that he'll do fine. He might do. I don't think he'll be that 2017, 2018 type caliber performance again, but I don't think that he'll do what he did last year either. And so I think that there's going to be improvement, but not significant improvement. So maybe an accurate placement here at 27. 15.8 sounds really low to me though. I'd maybe bump it up to 17 if I'm being generous. In any case, Andy Dalton on Chicago at 28th, at the 28th position here. It looks like Andy Dalton's going to be the Bears quarterback at this point. The Red Rocket is gonna lead Chi-Town to success here. And so with that in mind, 15.8 might be a lot. That might be difficult for him to reach on Chicago's team. You saw what Mitch Trubisky and Nick Foles, what both of them tried to do back there. They couldn't. I mean, they barely could have passed 15.8 themselves, and I don't think Andy Dalton is any better than either of those quarterbacks. And so 15.8 might be generous, maybe 15 per game, even lower maybe. He might get replaced by a rookie, or it's not too late to trade for someone. Russell Wilson is still in the talks to go to Chicago, so we'll see what happens there. I don't think that if Andy Dalton starts, I don't think that he's anything special, and so there's probably an accurate placement here. Sam Darnold at 29 is an interesting conversation. I don't think that I can accurately rank him because it's pretty obvious that the Jets are going to be taking a quarterback, probably Zach Wilson at number 2, since they haven't traded out of it yet. And so assuming that Zach Wilson is there instead of Sam Darnold, I don't know. I might give him a solid amount of points, like 15 points. It's hard to project for these types of rookies, and so I'm just going to assume that Sam Darnold's going elsewhere and that he's not going to have like an accurate projection for this season because he might end up as a backup somewhere. He might end up as a different team. And so I think I'm just going to play it safe here and just skip this one over. Teddy Bridgewater on Carolina, if he plays for them again, he wasn't anything special. But you also have to keep in mind that he's going to be getting Christian McCaffrey back from injury. That's going to be huge to change the entire offense. He's projected at 16.6 fantasy points per game. And I don't think that's... I think that's a little too high, maybe 16 fantasy points per game. He's still got DJ Moore, I think is his name. He's still got that dude from the Jets, Robbie Anderson. And so those weapons aren't too bad necessarily. He can complete passes to them. I think 16 is respectable. Now, Jimmy G on the 49ers is definitely another interesting conversation because the 49ers just recently traded up to get the number 3 overall pick. And if you're trading up to number 3, you're going to take a quarterback. And so I think Jimmy G is on his way out. Wherever he ends up, I think that he'll be able to play well. I always thought that Jimmy G is a good quarterback. Garoppolo was always pretty solid and consistently good. Maybe not great, but he was always good. And so let's see what his projection is. He's number 31. 15.8 I think is pretty low for him. Wherever he ends up, I think he can get somewhere around that 16.5 mark, maybe 17 if he's lucky. What else we got? We got Taysom Hill, PJ Walker. Yeah, these guys are all backups, and so we're just gonna, I think we'll call it there at the quarterback position. 40-something minutes into the recording, we're just now starting the running back position. So here we go. This is gonna be interesting. Maybe speed up a little bit. I don't know, but if you're sticking with me at this point, hey, I respect it. The dedication here, and I appreciate it. You're probably one of my favorite people at this point. The fact that you'd be willing to listen to me for several hours on end, just talk into a microphone on loop, but it definitely means a lot, and I appreciate it. We've just hit our first checkpoint. Let's move on through the running back position. We'll start with Christian McCaffrey, obviously, is at number 1. His projection is 23.4 compared to the next best of 20.5. And I think that's going without saying. Christian McCaffrey was a beast last season and the season before that until he got hurt. And so I don't think you have to worry about him getting up to that mark as long as he can stay healthy. We saw his potential. He might even be able to average 24 fantasy points per game. Who knows? I mean, why not go 25 if we're at it at this point? Christian McCaffrey is, I think he's going to be the best running back in the league next season. And so definitely a good placement here at 1, maybe even more fantasy points per game for his projection. Saquon Barkley at 2 with 20.5 points per game. I think that's reasonable. Again, the Giants are sort of building here and trying to almost make a run for it. It looks like they're starting to ramp up in this rebuild sort of phase with Daniel Jones. They just brought in Galladay. Barkley's back. They got Ingram back. They got a solid squad, but I don't think that Saquon Barkley is the number 2 running back by any means. I think that he's probably going to end up top 5, but number 2, I don't think so. Maybe a projection of 19.5 or 20, but 20.5 seems like a little bit too much for Saquon. With Dalvin Cook on Minnesota, I think that's who I would put in Saquon's place. He's projected with 22 fantasy points per game right now, and I don't really understand why he appears at number 3, even though he's projected a 1.5 more than Saquon. But yeah, I think that Dalvin Cook belongs in the number 2 spot. I think he's the second best running back. We saw a lot of work from him last season. I think he had that one game where he scored 6 touchdowns in a game, which was probably one of the most points I've seen scored from a running back in ever, really. And so he definitely belongs up here, second place, and definitely not number 1. McCaffrey, I think, what we saw beginning of last year and the year before that. He belongs in number 1 spot, but Dalvin Cook, a solid number 2, with the chance to maybe take that number 1 spot sometime in the season if McCaffrey isn't what he was before getting hurt. But again, from what we know right now, I think Cook is your number 2 guy. At number 4 for ESPN's ranking, we have Alvin Kamara. He's projected 20 points flat, and I think that's very reasonable. I don't know if he's the 4th best running back, maybe top 5, and maybe a little bit outside of the top 5, if we're being honest, but we did see a lot of good things from Alvin Kamara last season. They really used him for pretty much everything. He ran the ball, he caught the ball. He was a big part of that Saints offense, and with Jameis Winston coming in, they're going to have to rely on Kamara a lot more this season, or whoever they bring in for that matter. If it's not Jameis Winston, for whoever's the quarterback, they're going to have to rely on Kamara a lot. And so 20 points is reasonable. He might be able to score even more, maybe 21. We'll see. Number 5 is Derrick Henry, and I think that Derrick Henry should probably be switched with Alvin Kamara, which is why I was, sort of questioning his placement there. Because Derrick Henry is just always going to run. He's just going to run, and you're not going to stop him. There's nothing to be said about it. He's just going to go. He's projected at 19.8 fantasy points per game right now. I think that he'll be able to reach that 21 mark maybe, because he just carries the ball like 25 times a game and rushes for 100 yards a game at least. He just goes. That's literally the entire Titans offense, is give Derrick Henry the ball and let him do what he does best. And he just runs through people, and no one can stop him. So I think that he's at least top 5, maybe move him up a couple spots. But definitely a great choice in any situation. Ezekiel Elliott is definitely an interesting conversation piece at number 6, because he wasn't impressive last season. Like I was cautious to take him in daily fantasy stuff. I didn't have him in my main league, but in daily fantasy stuff, it was definitely not a lock to take him in that scenario, because he fumbled the ball a few times. He wasn't able to get moving a few times. It was just questionable all around. It's something you can't rely on, and something I don't want to rely on. And so at number 6, I wouldn't take him as the 6th best running back. At 18.7, I think that's pretty reasonable, maybe 18 points per game if I was rounding down a little bit. Because it's just, you really don't know what's going to happen with Dak back and the Cowboys starting to build and make yet another run for this thing. You never know. Maybe they'll spend on the O-line. Maybe Zeke will get his stuff together and actually figure out what he's doing on the field. But I don't think he's consistent enough to be this high in the rankings. Now we have Austin Eckler at number 7. This is kind of surprising to me, because Austin Eckler was good last season, but top 10 good, maybe number 10, not top 10 like number 7 here. 18.5 is his projection per game. I think that's way too high. Maybe put him at 16 per game, 16.5 per game at the max. He did well, but not that well. I just think that this is way overrated and blown out of proportion. So, yeah, move him down a couple spots. Moving on. Aaron Jones, on the other hand, I think that he belongs up here in the top 10. He's got a projection of 18 points per game. I think that's very reasonable. If anything, I'd move him up, but I think 18 is right around where I'd put him anyways. He's going back to Green Bay. He did well last season, and he'll probably do similar things this season. Score at least a touchdown per game on average, maybe like 0.75 touchdowns per game, I think is what it might end up like. But yeah, they just run the ball with him when they need to, and he's consistent, so I like him here. Cam Akers at number 9. He's projected for 17.5 points per game. I'm not really sure how I feel about this one, to be completely honest. He was good last season. At the end, we really saw LA working with him and sort of putting the team on his back, but they also employed that sort of running back by committee strategy at some points in the season. I know they have Darrell Henderson around, and they were sort of throwing him in there. I don't know if Cam Akers is going to be their guy for every game at running back. And so for 17.4 points per game, I don't know, maybe 15.4 points per game, maybe 16.4, but it seems like a lot for someone who might not even be the guy for the entire game. They might switch him out a couple times, so I'd drop him down a couple slots. Nick Chubb, on the other hand, at number 10, even though I just said that he might not be the guy for the entire time, I'll put him down. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt is a different kind of duo. They are able to just feed. They're just getting fed in that offense in Cleveland. It's almost as if the offense in Cleveland is built around Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, whereas the offense in LA is built around their receivers instead of their running backs, which is why Akers is less good. And Chubb, I think, is going to be a much better pick this season. He did really well last season. At the end, he sort of tapered off a little bit, but I still think that he's going to dominate here. He's got a projection of 17.3. I think that's pretty low. I think I'd bump him up to 19.5, maybe 20. He's definitely one of the top running backs. Not top 5, I don't think, but definitely at least top 10. Bump him up a couple spots, maybe make him number 7, number 8 here is what should have been done for ESPN. All right, number 11, we got Jonathan Taylor. I think this is definitely reasonable, 17 points per game. I think that's a minimum for Taylor. He did really well last season with the Colts once he started to get moving and the Colts started to realize his real potential. Jonathan Taylor is definitely a monster and is probably going to be their guy going forward. Marlon Mack, I'm pretty sure, is coming back from injury, though. And so there might be a little bit of competition there. But from what we saw of Jonathan Taylor nearing the second half of last season, Jonathan Taylor should still be their guy and get most of the carries, if not all the carries. 11 is definitely respectable. Maybe bump him up a couple of points in projection to get him to 18 points per game, maybe 19. Number 12, we got Miles Sanders. And Miles Sanders has never been a guy for me. Like, I've never really wanted Miles Sanders in daily fantasy or just, regular fantasy drafts. He's just not that appealing to me for what it's worth. 17 fantasy points per game, honestly, I'd consider that a max for him. I haven't really seen much out of Miles Sanders. He's consistently good, I will say that. It's just you don't really get that spark with him. And so maybe he'll get around 17 points per game, but I don't think you'll ever get more than that, at least consistently speaking. He might get like a couple games out of the 17 games next season where he gets 20-something. But I think for Miles Sanders, most of his games are going to end up in the high 10s range, which should put him around 12 where he is right now. All right, with DeAndre Swift here, we have his projection at 16.9 at 13th place. I also think this one's pretty high for him. DeAndre Swift didn't really show anything special last season. He was the primary running back, but again, similarly to Cam Akers, he was splitting time occasionally with other backs in Detroit. And so I don't think that he belongs at 13. Projection of 16.9 seems way too high for me. Maybe dropping down to 15 points per game is what I would project him at. I just don't think that he's necessarily going to be their go-to option in the run game. And even if he is their number one running back and the guy that takes most of the carries, I don't think that he'll be able to get that many yards. He might not get many opportunities or many yards. And so, yeah, I don't think he's that high. Maybe the fact that they got rid of their running backs, he'll drop a little. He'll be able to get some more opportunities. And so maybe 16 points per game at this point. But, yeah, I don't have high hopes for him. Number 14, we got Chase Edmonds. With Kenyon Drake leaving, Chase Edmonds seems to be the running back going forward for Arizona. And so at a projection of 16.8, I think that's high. I also think that's high. Chase Edmonds, even if he is the running back one, 16.8 seems like a lot to ask. Maybe 15 per game is more reasonable. But from what we saw when Chase Edmonds started games last season, I'm pretty sure he only got like around 12 to 15 per game. I think 15 is a max for him maybe. But Chase Edmonds isn't anything special. Certainly not top 15. I'd drop him down at least a few spots here. James Robinson at number 15. He's projected for 15.9 points per game. I think that's low. Or maybe a little bit low. I think 16 is a minimum for him. That might be a floor, considering that he's probably the best undrafted rookie I've ever seen in the league. He did really well last season with Jacksonville. Really proved his point and did what he had to do to make a name for himself. At least top 15. I'd maybe bump him up a couple of spots. I think he's above Chase Edmonds and DeAndre Swift. Project him for maybe 17 points per game, but on a Jacksonville team that's sort of shorthanded, they're going to have Trevor Lawrence, but James Robinson, they're still not going to have that many weapons in the pass game if they're going to take Trevor Lawrence like that. And so James Robinson is still going to be a viable pick, and I think that he'll do very well next season. Pretty similarly to what he did last season. It's going to be on par with 2020. 2021 will be. Moving on now, number 16, we got Chris Carson at 16.5 points per game, and I think that this is exactly where I'd put him. I'd put him up in the rankings a little bit. Again, DeAndre Swift and Chase Edmonds seem a bit high, and so I'd put Chris Carson and James Robinson a few spots higher, but his projection seems, it seems kind of on point. 16.5 isn't bad, because there are some games where Chris Carson just gets fed and gets like 22, 23, 24 fantasy points. But then there are other where he doesn't, and he'll only get like 11 or 12. And so right in the middle there with 16.5 seems reasonable and fair. 17, we got Josh Jacobs. He's another quarterback who had a group with James Robinson and Chris Carson to bump up a few spots above Swift and Edmonds, because he's a very reliable guy. 15.5 seems fair, maybe a little bit more, but again, at the end of the season, we sort of saw the Raiders drop off in using Jacobs for whatever reason. I didn't really understand that, but I noticed that the Raiders stopped using Jacobs as they usually did throughout the season. And so that might be a little bit of a concern, but overall I think Josh Jacobs is still a great pick. Group him up with Chris Carson and Robinson and move all three of them just up a few spots as they are right now. Number 18, we got Antonio Gibson, and well, why not? We'll group Gibson with that group of three: Robinson, Carson, and Jacobs, because Antonio Gibson definitely proved that he's a good running back one for Washington. At the end of last season, he kind of stepped up. In the beginning, it was kind of unclear who Washington's guy was, but this Gibson kid really stepped up, and in 18th place, projected 15.2. I think that's very reasonable for him. I think that's very achievable for him. He might be able to get up to 16 points per game, maybe 17 even. With Ryan Fitzpatrick coming in, there's going to be some more interesting packages for him to run and maybe even a few passes for him to catch. So yeah, Gibson's definitely better than where he's ranked here. Bring him up with the Robinson, Carson, and Jacobs group, while you bring down Swift, Edmonds, and maybe even Sanders, I think. Number 19 is Clyde Edwards-Helaire, no H, if you notice. That's definitely enunciated by everyone. 15.2 points per game at number 19 for CEH, I think is fair. That's reasonable. 15 points per game about for CEH is maybe where I would put him. The Chiefs are always going to be good. They're always going to need their run game alongside their pass game. At the beginning of the season, it sort of seemed as if the Chiefs had a completely different game plan where CEH was running the ball a lot. But then towards the end, we sort of saw them return to what they were in 2019, where they were passing the ball a lot and going through the air and doing, sort of crazy things with the ball. But if they do continue to sort of adopt that running game into their game plan more often in 2021, like they did in the beginning of 2020, then CEH is going to see a lot of ball time. I think 15.5 is pretty reasonable. Not a bad placement here. I think I sort of agree with that. Joe Mixon is now at number 20 at 16 points. And honestly didn't really hear much about Mixon last season. I think he got hurt pretty early on, and so there's not really much to say about it. In 2019, he was a beast, and I think that was really good. But in 2020, there wasn't really much going on with Mixon or any news at all. I think it's because he was hurt, but still, there isn't much to go off here. I think his placement is reasonable, and yeah, I think that's all I got to say here. Myles Gaskin then at 21 for Miami. He's Miami's guy going forward. His projection is 14.5. I'm not exactly sure how to think about how to feel about that one. I think Myles Gaskin isn't especially good. Maybe belongs in like the 12-point range per game. Maybe even 10. I don't think he's anything special really, and Miami might find a replacement for him soon. Yeah, Gaskin isn't indispensable, and the Dolphins might find somebody else to take his job at some point in the season, so I don't think that Gaskin belongs this high. Maybe bump him down a few spots, drop his projection by a couple points at least. J.K. Dobbins then at 22, projected for 14.5. I think that's fair. I think that's definitely very fair, because they also have Gus Edwards on Baltimore playing alongside him, and they kind of share time at some points in the season, and so 14.5 is pretty reasonable. I do think J.K. Dobbins is a really good running back and that he'll be able to score points, but as long as Gus Edwards is there sharing time with J.K. Dobbins, it's going to be limited. But yeah, that's about all I have to say about him. I think that he's in a good spot here. Maybe a little low, but yeah, I think he belongs right below CEH and Mixon. I think there's a pretty solid placement. Next up, we got David Montgomery at 23. And he's projected 14.3 fantasy points per game. Now, the interesting thing about this one is that Tariq Cohen was sidelined with an ACL last season, which left David Montgomery as the only running back in Chicago, where he just ran the ball a lot, and he did very well. And so if he's the only running back running things in Chicago, he should be at least 16 points per game, 17 points per game. But with Tariq Cohen coming back from injury and starting to share time again with David Montgomery, I think that there might be a little bit of contention and a little bit of limitation, sort of the cannibalization of David Montgomery's points by his own teammate. And so there's probably a reasonable placement considering the injury statuses of his teammates. If he ends up being the bell cow for Chicago, then he's definitely worth more spots. But where he is right now, with the situation that we know about, I think this is fair. David Johnson at 24 is kind of funny considering they gave up DeAndre Hopkins, who I'm sure is going to be a top 5 option for David Johnson. He's projected to get 15.1 fantasy points per game. Oh, God, that's just really hilarious, considering that Houston kind of just threw away their best player for someone who's now ranked 24th on the ESPN 2021 fantasy list. I think that this might be low, again, considering that Houston gave up so much for him, and we saw that they used him a lot last season. He got I don't know, I think his average ended up maybe around 15 points per game. He did pretty well in most games he played, from what I remember, and so I think I'd bump him up maybe a little bit, put him above Montgomery and Dobbins at least. Gaskin should drop too, but I think he's right around that CEH and Mixon range that I was talking about earlier. That makes the most sense to me. Now we got Raheem Mostert at 24. He's projected 15 fantasy points per game, and this is something that I think is definitely a question mark. He's got questionable on his name after all, but I think that Mostert is an interesting choice because he's got that entire committee around him in San Francisco just waiting to take the ball as well. I don't exactly remember everyone. There's Jeff Wilson down there, I know, but he's got that entire committee around him just waiting to take the ball. And Raheem Mostert was doing very well when he was active and in the game and sort of being their primary focus. Like towards the second half of the season, it looked like Raheem Mostert was the 49ers' top guy. But when he got hurt, there was sort of a power struggle down there in San Francisco. And so if that power struggle continues, Raheem Mostert isn't going to be that good, but if he is the number one guy, I think he belongs right where he is right now. Maybe a few spots higher, but I think it's a solid position here, just as long as there isn't any contention. If there's contention at the position where they're maybe splitting time, I'd consider dropping him down a couple spots, but as it is now, not bad. Next, we have Melvin Gordon for 26th place at 13.8 points per game. I think I'd actually consider giving him a few more points per game, maybe putting him at 15 points per game and bumping him up a couple spots, because in Denver, you got to remember, they had Phillip Lindsay splitting time with him, but now that Phillip Lindsay it seems like he's gone. I'm pretty sure Phillip Lindsay's somewhere else right now, or he's at least on his way out, but I think that Melvin Gordon is going to be the running back in Denver, and with Drew Lock and any consistent weapons otherwise, Melvin Gordon is going to see the ball a lot. He'll probably see a lot of touchdowns as well. And so I think there's a pretty low placement for him. Same thing goes for Leonard Fournette. At 27, I think that's rather low for 13.1 fantasy points per game. Ronald Jones is still around, and that was a whole thing last season where I couldn't figure out for the life of me whether they were going to give the ball to Fournette or Jones. But it seems like Fournette's going to be their primary guy going forward from what we saw in the Super Bowl and what we saw in the playoffs. Fournette really stepped up and reached his prime that we sort of saw coming out of college. And so if Tampa Bay continues to use him like they did in the playoffs and like they did in the Super Bowl without Ronald Jones, then he's going to be an even better guy, move him up a couple spots. But again, that Jones issue is a question mark, and so we'll see what Tampa Bay and Bruce Arians does with that. Kareem Hunt follows at 28th place. I talked about him earlier with Nick Chubb, how they're kind of a duo there. Kareem Hunt's obviously the lesser of the two in terms of fantasy, projected for 12 points per game. I'd consider giving him more depending on schedule strength, maybe 13 points per game. But again, Nick Chubb is going to be their primary option. Kareem Hunt's going to come in for a change of pace, take third downs maybe, or a short receiving option, while Nick Chubb's just going to do the dirty work. So I think that this projection is reasonable, maybe bumping up a couple spots, but not by much. I think this is pretty fair where they put him. Now, Mike Davis, he's apparently, I guess he's on Atlanta now. That's news to me. He's in 29th place on this ranking sheet. He goes to the Atlanta Falcons, and he's projected 11.7 points. I'm assuming that means that Todd Gurley's out the door there. And if Mike Davis is the guy in Atlanta, 11.7 sounds fair. He did a very good job in Carolina, replacing McCaffrey, but I think that was just a result of Carolina having a good running team. I think that the variables surrounding him with the coaching staff and the O-line and everything like that allowed him to thrive with Carolina. So that's why McCaffrey is so good. Not only does McCaffrey have the talent, but he also has a team around him. I don't think Mike Davis is going to be as good as he was on Carolina, and so this projection is pretty reasonable. Kenyon Drake is now on the Raiders. That's also news to me at 30th place, projected 11.6. That does change our mind about Jacobs a little bit, because I didn't know that Kenyon Drake is stepping in Vegas, but I don't think it's going to change my mind that much because, again, Josh Jacobs is going to be the primary guy. Drake might just be a change of pace back, similarly in the same way as Hunt is. And so Drake might not have as big of a season this year as he did last year. And so I'd maybe avoid him. It doesn't really seem like there's anything known about that situation as of right now. We got Ronald Jones next. Talked about him earlier. It seems like Fournette's taking over the team. His projection of 11.2 might be high if Fournette really is their guy in Tampa Bay, but we'll have to keep an eye on that situation. J.D. McKissick next at 32. He's got a projection of 11.2. There's another similar situation. We're getting to the backups here, where the player is going to be, sort of a change of pace back at best. They're sitting behind someone for the most part at this point in the rankings, and so I think that J.D. McKissick is going to be similar to Jones and Drake at this point. Tevin Coleman on the Jets. That's also new information to me. I guess I missed a few of these trades at the end of last season. But anyways, 33 in the rankings, projected for 11.1 points. I think that's pretty fair. I think he's about where he needs to be. Maybe bump him up above a few of the backups like J.D. McKissick and Ronald Jones. I think he's probably got a better chance of getting more points than either of those backups. But still, being a running back on the Jets is not exactly the ideal job. And so he might not have a lot of success, but as a starter in the NFL, I think it's always going to be a good pick. Tariq Cohen falls into that McKissick and Jones bucket where he's going to be a backup. So not too high on him. 34th place with 10.6 points per game. Might be a little high. I think I'd drop him down to maybe 9 points per game. Something like that range. We got Benny Snell. I think we're just getting into the backups here. I'll go for a few more here. Benny Snell is at 35th place with 10.5 points per game. It's unclear what's happening with James Conner. I don't think I even got to him yet. Yeah, I don't know what's happening with James Conner, but with Benny Snell here, I think that 10.5 is a lot. For Benny Snell, we didn't really see a lot. We didn't see much from him last year. He wasn't spectacular. Definitely not 10.5 worth. Maybe 9 points per game if I had to guess here. Jeff Wilson moving on with 36th place. His projection puts him around 9.6 points per game. I talked about this scenario earlier with Raheem Mostert. It's still unclear what's happening there, and so while the question marks remain, maybe just take him as a backup, put him on your bench, but nothing worth taking as a starter at this point, I don't think. Nyheim Hines at 37, projected 9.4 points per game. Nyheim Hines is one of the better change of pace backs in the league, I think. We saw a lot of receiving plays and, double running back plays alongside Jonathan Taylor last year with the Colts. And so I think that Nyheim Hines is probably one of the better backups. I wouldn't mind bumping him up a couple spots, putting his projection more in line with some of the top backups like Ronald Jones and Kenyon Drake. I think he belongs at like 10.5 points per game maybe. 38, we got Devin Singletary with 9.4 points per game. The entire Bills running game is just a mess right now, and I don't think I can accurately comment on it. I really don't know what's going on there, and I don't think they do either. Zach Moss, I feel like, is going to be their guy going forward. Although Devin Singletary might be better right now, I think they're going to give Zach Moss more time and more of the ball just to sort of build him up since he's younger and has more potential. And so I'd maybe switch these two, Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, who's here at 42. Yeah, I think I'd maybe switch their placements and projections for each of them. Next, we've got the Patriots running backs. We've got 39 is Damian Harris and 40 is James White. Damian Harris has 9.3 and James White has 9.2. There's another great double running back duo similar to Nyheim Hines with James White, where he's able to make plays in the pass game and sort of in that shorter range aerial game as a running back that most running backs aren't able to do. And so he's going to be able to produce alongside Harris. I do think that Harris is going to be the better choice since he's going to be their on-the-ground touchdown guy if they need it within like the 2-yard line or any scenario like that for the Patriots. But again, James White is there. I think these are pretty solid placements for the both of them. All right, we're getting into the kind of trash time backups at this point. I think I'm going to move on to the receivers at this point. Finally hitting that hour 15 mark on my recording on what I posted. I'm probably going to cut out the beginning. There were a couple takes, I think. So that'll probably end up at like, 1 hour 14 something. We are Oh, we're 75 minutes in, and we just started. We're just about to start the longest section of the entire video. So strap in. Here we go. Stay with me here. I don't know if anyone's with me here, but if you are with me here, I don't know why you listen, but I'm glad you do. Stay with me. We're almost, well, we're not almost done. We're about to start the hardest part. Once we get done with that part, we're on to tight ends, then defenses. I guess we could do. No kickers. No. I'm not doing kickers. I decided that's not happening. Kickers is too much. But we will do all the receivers, at least all the relevant receivers. Once we get to like the third option, I'll be like, okay, we'll call it there. Get the tight ends, and then, yeah, defenses after that. Starting off here, though, we got Davante Adams at number 1. Projected 21.4 fantasy points per game. And if I had to say anything about this, I'd say higher. Give him more. Maybe like 23 fantasy. 23 is kind of crazy, but 22 fantasy points per game. Because looking at the rest of that Green Bay offense, there's really not much going on. Sure, you got Aaron Jones again, but the receivers aren't anything special. And I don't think they're going to bring in anything special either. They've got, I think Devin Funchess is coming back, but that's really it. They've got Marquez Valdez-Scantling. They've got, who is it? Alan Lazard. They really don't have anyone big. They got Robert Tonyan, but at the end of the day, Davante Adams is the guy in Green Bay, and so he's absolutely the number 1 receiver next season, maybe even with a higher projection than 21.4, which is crazy for a receiver, but I think he's that good. Number 2, we have Tyreek Hill, projected for 19.2 points per game. And my thoughts on Hill is that he is one of the most not the most, but he's definitely a boom or bust receiver. I think that with Tyreek Hill, you're either going to get a week where he scores 25 fantasy points or he scores 10 fantasy points. And it's not like 10 is bad, but for Tyreek Hill, that's an expensive pick, whether you're spending draft capital in a fantasy football draft or you're spending money in a daily fantasy lineup. He's very expensive for what it's worth, and you're not going to be able to, I don't think you can rely on him to score at least that 18-point mark that he needs to score every single week. Sure, he'll probably average out to that, but there are going to be some games where he only gets like 2 catches. We saw that last year. He's sometimes used as a, Jesus Christ. He's sometimes used as a distraction more so than an actual weapon, where he'll just, draw double coverage and let the rest of his team take the rest of the balls and drive downfield without him. But then you'll also see where he's not a distraction, where he goes all the way downfield and catches like a 60-yard touchdown, and that alone will make him worth his value. And so I think that at the end of the day, the total fantasy points that he scores throughout the season might put him at the number 2 receiver in the league right now. But as for consistency, and for consistency's sake, for a week-to-week purpose, I don't think that he's the second best option you got here. He's probably top 5, but I don't think he's number 2. Number 2, I think, would be Stephon Diggs, who's at number 3 in this list. And his projection puts him at right around 19 points per game, 18.9 ESPN has him at. I think that Stephon Diggs is a more reliable option than Tyreek Hill just because Josh Allen gets the ball to Diggs so much every single game that his points per reception is going to be going through the roof for most games in the season. I think he was he might have averaged around 9 to 10 receptions per game, even more targets per game at the end of 2020. And so Stephon Diggs is going to get the ball. Unlike Tyreek Hill, who might not get the ball during a game, Stephon Diggs will almost certainly get the ball in every game. His average for the season is probably going to end up similar to that of Tyreek Hill. It's just that you're going to get more consistency throughout every game. With Tyreek Hill, you might have one game with 30 points. You might have one game with 10 points. With Stephon Diggs, you're probably going to get 20, 22, 23, 19, 20, 21, stuff like that. And so I think Stephon Diggs is probably the better choice fantasy-wise and sort of going in for the long term in a fantasy football league. We've got a number 4. We got DeAndre Hopkins. And I think that DeAndre Hopkins is right around where I'd put Tyreek Hill. I think I'd go Adams, Diggs, Hill, Hopkins. And the reason that is because there were a few games last season where Hopkins didn't put up Hopkins numbers. There were a few games where he only got like a few touches and maybe only scored 10 fantasy points. And while you have that with Hill as well, I think Hill's ceiling is significantly higher, and Hill can single-handedly win you matchups depending on how explosive he is. Hopkins can't do that, I don't think. He's got a max potential of like, I don't know, I don't want to say 30 is like a max potential, but Hill's max potential is like 50. I think we saw like a 50-point game from him last season at some point. And so I think that Hopkins is below Hill since he's got similar inconsistencies, just a lower ceiling, but still he's going to be able to get you massive points. That average of 18, I think it will end up averaging out to 18 over the entire season's length. It's just you might not see 18 every single week. At number 5, we have A.J. Brown. And A.J. Brown was a player who was kind of quietly popping off in the background last season there. I didn't really pay much attention to him. But at the end of the season, I started to see his numbers, and it was impressive, him being the number one guy. I think that Corey Davis is still talking with his contract. Oh, wait. No, never mind. That's Calvin Ridley. I just misread that. I'm not sure about Corey Davis right now, but if Corey Davis isn't at Tennessee, A.J. Brown is definitely a top 10 guy, considering Jonnu Smith is already gone. Or not top 10, top 5, I mean, and belongs where he is. He's projected for what? What is it? 17.6 per game. I think that's definitely feasible and manageable for A.J. Brown. If Corey Davis is gone, put that projection up even further. If Corey Brown is still around, though, I don't know. I think 17.5 is right where it belongs. Number 5 overall. I also think that's pretty fair. He's a great receiver and probably will continue to be in 2021. At number 6, we have DK Metcalf. His projection is 16.8 points per game. And I think we have another inconsistency problem here. With similarly to Hill and Hopkins, Metcalf is going to get some big games where he gets those long balls and just hauls it in and gets huge points, but he won't get much points per reception. And so I think he's more valuable in leagues that do half PPR or no PPR at all. But in a PPR format, there are definitely better options that'll give you more reliable points. I think I'd maybe drop DK down a couple of spots at most. 16.8, maybe drop it down to 16 points per game. Someone else I'd put there instead is Keenan Allen, who's at 7th place right now in the rankings for 16.6 fantasy points per game. I think that for 16.6 fantasy points per game, I think I'd bump that up maybe to 17.5 at most, and probably put him in front of DK Metcalf, right behind A.J. Brown. And the reason for that is that Keenan Allen is a reception machine. Like at the end of last season, you saw it with Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen. Herbert would just give the ball to Keenan Allen maybe like 11 times in a game, and he would just rack up points exclusively from receptions. And then even on top of that, he'd get a touchdown or a long ball that would bring him up even further. And so I think Keenan Allen is a great choice next season. He's one of the better receivers available, I think. Michael Thomas at number 8. His projection gets you to 16.3. I'm not exactly sure how to feel about this one because he was hurt for most of last season, and when he came back, he wasn't at Michael Thomas levels. But what we saw in 2019 for Michael Thomas was a top 3 wide receiver. And so I'm really unsure about this one because if he comes back fully healthy, he's going to have a new quarterback anyways. I think it's a risk if you take him in any situation, even if he is fully healthy. He's got Jameis Winston throwing to him. Yeah, I'm just not sure about this one. Number 8, maybe a little too high considering the amount of risk you have to take there. 16 points per game. That sounds reasonable for Michael Thomas, actually. 16 points per game is not a bad projection, but I don't know. There's just a lot of risk factor there that I wouldn't be willing to take if I were drafting at that point and had the opportunity. Justin Jefferson at number 9. This is an interesting one because he's still got Adam Thielen around, and I think they're on a similar level. Justin Jefferson, I agree, is probably the better of the duo in terms of fantasy output. Jefferson is projected 16.2 right now. That sounds like a decently fair one. But again, Adam Thielen is going to be competing for those same catches. And so there's going to be some competition there, and that's not really what you want from a top 10 receiver. You want someone who's definitively the number 1 guy, and I don't think Jefferson is definitively number 1. I'd maybe bump his projection down to 14 or 15, since there's going to be some games where Thielen takes over and some games where he takes over, and so yeah, I don't think he's a top 10 guy, honestly. I think there are some better options that are more standout. You know what I'm saying? Like, there are more standout players where you don't need to sort of guess which one of the two of the duo is going to get the ball. Like Terry McLaurin at number 10, I think this is a standout player who should be in Jefferson's spot, maybe even higher, because he is absolutely the number 1 guy in Washington. And with a projection of 16, it's not really saying much, being the best of Washington. I mean, that's not really anything to write home about, considering I don't think anyone in the NFC East went positive last season. And so with McLaurin, he still is the number 1 guy. He's going to have a better quarterback of Ryan Fitzpatrick throwing to him. And there's no competition there. He did very well with Alex Smith last season. I think he'll do even better with Ryan Fitzpatrick. 16 sounds really fair for him. I think I'd keep him where he is. Keep him into the top 10 for sure. Maybe bump him up in front of Jefferson or Michael Thomas if you're still worried about him. Number 11, we have Amari Cooper. And his projection brings him to 15.6 points per game. I think that that's fair. I think that his projection's good. Maybe bump it up a little bit. I think that he's also a top 10 receiver. Switch him out for Jefferson. That'd be fine. Put him in the top 10 somewhere. Because with Dak Prescott throwing him the ball again, Amari Cooper is going to be a great pick. Even with CeeDee Lamb competing for shares, I think that Amari Cooper is differentiated from CeeDee Lamb more so than Jefferson and Thielen, if you understand what I'm saying. Like, the difference between the Cowboys receivers with Cooper and CeeDee Lamb is greater than the difference between Jefferson and Thielen. So Amari Cooper is probably going to end up getting a relatively greater share of those balls and opportunities, and so I think that he's probably a better bet than Jefferson if we're comparing the two. But overall, I think he's a great pick. Probably 16 points per game, and probably a top 10 quarterback. Receiver. Oh, jeez, what are we doing here? Number 12, we got Calvin Ridley. And Ridley is projected for 15.3 points per game. And I'm surprised that Julio Jones didn't appear first. I'm very shocked by that. I think that their competition level is very close. Like, you know how I was talking about CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper and then Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. I think that Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones are right next to each other. Are either of them top 10 receivers? I don't know. They might be. I think that they belong right next to each other, Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones, because they have the same quarterback, the same offense, and I think the same skill level, or at least similar skill level. And so, just looking down the list, I see Julio Jones is ranked really low for what he's been able to do in the past, and so I think Calvin Ridley should either drop or Julio Jones should come up. At a projection of 15.3, I think that's reasonable. Maybe a projection of 15 flat for Ridley and Jones. I do think that they're pretty much identical when it comes down to it. At number 13, we have Robert Woods. And there's another situation with him sharing time with Kupp. I do think that it's more akin to that Jefferson and Thielen comparison, where Woods, although he is the better receiver of the duo, he's still going to have to share a little bit of time. At 13, though, with a projection of 15 points per game, I still think that's a little much. Maybe drop him down to 14 points per game and a couple spots in the rankings here. Number 14, you got Allen Robinson for Chicago, 15.3. He is the definitive receiver for Chicago. But again, he's got the red rocket thrown to him, and you saw what happened when he took over for Dallas last season. So I don't know how much I would trust his arm to get to Allen Robinson's arms. So for 15.3 at 14, maybe a little much, maybe 14 points per game on average for Robinson. But again, I do think that he's a great receiver. It's going to depend on who's throwing him the ball. If Chicago brings in a Russell Wilson type player or someone through the draft who's actually good, no offense, Andy Dalton, but I mean, come on, then his projection is going to go way up, like maybe 16, 17 points per game. Because if he has someone throwing him the ball accurately, he can be a great player, a complete disruptor. But otherwise, with Andy Dalton and as it is now, I don't think he belongs much higher than where he is right now. And maybe drop him a couple spots. 15 is Deontay Johnson. You're going to have 15.2 points per game as his projection. And that's reasonable, I think. At the end of last season, we saw Deontay Johnson separating himself from the rest of the TikTok crew down there in Pittsburgh. And with the same quarterback, same situation, very similar environment, just a weaker run game, it looks like, because the Steelers never really had a run game. Steelers never really had a run game to begin with, but it's looking even worse this season if they don't draft anyone or take care of that. Deontay Johnson seems to be a great pick. Top 15 sounds fair to me. 15 points per game. That's pretty accurate, I'd say. Number 16 is Mike Evans, projected for 15.2 fantasy points per game. I don't know if that's low. I honestly don't, because, again, it's another situation where there's a bunch of good players on the team, and you don't know if he's going to get the ball. There's always that Mike Evans, Chris Godwin competition, and now Antonio Brown seems to be stepping up. He hasn't signed with the Buccaneers yet, but if he re-signs, there's going to be 3 guys right there, plus Gronk, that are all competing for touches. And so I don't know how much you can trust Evans on a week-to-week basis. He's definitely going to have those pop-off weeks where he gets like 20 fantasy points or so, just because he's lucky enough to get that long ball touchdown. But the next week, it might be Godwin getting the long ball. And Evans might only get a couple touches, bringing him to like 8 points. And so it's impossible to tell between these two. I tried to figure it out all of last season, and I couldn't. So, I don't know. I'd maybe steer clear of these guys if you could. If they've got a really good matchup going on and you know, if they're playing someone who's going to lock down Evans or playing someone who's going to lock down Godwin, then it might be worth looking for the other one for that week if you're doing daily fantasy. But for long term, it's very hard to tell the difference between Evans, Godwin, and if he plays on the team again, Antonio Brown. So it's difficult here. 16th place for 15.2 points. That might be high, but again, it's hard to tell. DJ Moore at 17th place, projected for 15.2 points per game. If anything, I'd say this is high because they still have Robbie Anderson, like I mentioned earlier in the video, if you can actually remember to that hour ago. Wow. Oh, wow, that was an hour ago, wasn't it? Huh, that's fun. But I think DJ Moore is definitely in competition with Robbie Anderson. I didn't see anything special out of Moore. He definitely gets more touches and is more consistent as a PPR receiver. 15.2 may be a little high. Maybe it should be 14.2. His placement, though, in the position as the 17th top receiver, I think that's decent. I don't really have much complaints with that. Maybe drop him a little bit, but overall, I think that's pretty fine. Adam Thielen, I've already talked about with Justin Jefferson. He's placed at 18th here with a projection of 15.1 points per game. Again, I think that I'd drop both Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen's projections a little bit just because they're going to eat up their shares and bring them a little closer to each other. So either drop Jefferson down or bring Thielen up. But at the end of the day, I don't think that there's much wrong here. I think what I would do personally is bring Jefferson down to maybe 15th or 16th place and keep Thielen at 18th just so that they're at a smaller gap between them because I think that's how that would work in Minnesota where the two of them are kind of taking over. 19, we have Brandon Cooks projected for 15.1, and I actually really like Brandon Cooks this season. I think 15.1 is his minimum. He's got huge potential, especially if Deshaun Watson comes back, but again, huge question mark there. If he has a somewhat competent receiver throwing to him, then I think Brandon Cooks is going to be a great pick because he's going to have Will Fuller going somewhere else, and then I guess his only competition is Kiki Cutie, and at the end of the day, who's Kiki Cutie? He's going to get a few touches per game. Brandon Cooks is the only guy left down there aside from David Johnson. And is he even a guy at this point? He's old. So I think Brandon Cooks is a great shot here, especially if the Texans figure out their quarterback situation. Cooper Kupp at 20, I already mentioned. He's 15 points projection. Bring him closer to Robert Woods, as I said earlier. Maybe bring Woods a couple spots down, couple spots up, and sort of make them on the same level. I think Woods is the better option, but still Kupp is almost as good. CeeDee Lamb at 21. His projection is 15 as well. I think that's very fair. I think that Cooper and Lamb should both go up because the Cowboys are going to have Dak thrown to them again, and Dak is a great quarterback. So bring CeeDee Lamb up 5 spots. Bring Cooper up 2 spots, and I think that his projection of 15 is reasonable. Maybe a little high. Maybe I'd drop it down to 14, but in any case, I think Lamb's a good pick. Let's see, at 22 we have Godwin, and again, his competition with Evans is just unpredictable and something I hate every week, just trying to guess. His projection is 15.9. I'd definitely drop that down. Wait, did I say 15.9? I did say 15.9. Yeah, that's really high. I think I'd drop it down to 14.9 at most, or maybe around that 15 mark. But again, I think him and Evans belong right next to each other because they're essentially alternating per week which one gets the touchdown. 23 is Julio Jones. It is far too low. I completely disagree with this. 15.7 projection I think is maybe an accurate projection, but I think he belongs right next to Calvin Ridley, similarly to Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. I think Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley should be right next to each other with the same projection because, again, it's kind of a coin flip who gets the touch. Tyler Lockett at 24. Now, that's a different story because him and DK Metcalf have a different relationship in that DK Metcalf typically gets the long ball and those longer range passes, whereas Tyler Lockett is more of a short range, within 15 yards type of guy where he just gets those short pickups and a lot of receptions, which is very good for PPR. And so at 24, projected for 14.3 points per game, I'd almost be inclined to put him up to 15.3 points per game and bring him up a couple spots on this list. But again, he's probably not going to get the long ball or the touchdown. Those will probably go to Metcalf, or if they're not passed, then they'll probably go to Carson. And so there's probably a fair placement, maybe a little low, if anything. Next up, we got Tyler Boyd at 25th place. I actually think that Tyler Boyd is the second receiver on Cincinnati. And let me explain. I think T. Higgins is really going to step into a bigger role. That seems like the Bengals' main receiver right now. He's a second year alongside Joe Burrow. They're both going to develop together, and I think that connection is only going to strengthen. Tyler Boyd is also really good. Well, not really good, but he's also a solid option on Cincinnati for Burrow to throw to. And as long as Burrow's in the game, I think that both Boyd and Higgins can succeed. I just think that Higgins is the better option, so I'd drop him below Higgins somewhere, drop him a few spots, and maybe put his projection at 13 points per game at max. Next up, we got Deebo Samuel at 26th place, projected for 14.1. Kendrick Bourne is going to New England now, and so Deebo Samuel seems to be the top guy in San Francisco. But I don't know how good he can be. They still got Brandon Ayuk around, and so I don't think that I would bank on Deebo Samuel getting so many points. I'd definitely drop him a few spots. 26 seems really high. 14 also seems high. Maybe put him at 12 points per game is my honest projection here. I don't think that he's going to be their number one guy definitively. He's going to be right around Brandon Ayuk's level. Number 27, we got Robbie Anderson. I talked about him a little bit earlier. His projection here is 14 points per game. That seems somewhat reasonable. I mean, they got Teddy Bridgewater throwing him the ball, and so it's going to be hard to actually get anything done unless they bring someone else in. But for 14 points per game, I think I'd put it around 12 points per game and drop him a couple spots, call it a day. You have water. Oh god, my voice is starting to go, but we can't. We gotta persevere. We gotta hold true, hold the line. Number 28, we got Courtland Sutton. They're putting him as the top receiver on Denver. I disagree. I think Jerry Jeudy is going to be the top receiver in Denver. He had some sparks of greatness last season, and I think with another year with that offense, they're really going to be able to develop with Drew Lock and Jerry Jeudy. I think is going to be a combo to watch out for. Sutton, I'd drop down a little bit more. He's projected 14 per game. Maybe project him for 12 per game at most and drop him down a couple spots in the rankings, but yeah, I think I definitely prefer Jerry Jeudy. Put him ahead of Courtland Sutton somehow, or put Sutton behind Jeudy somehow. I don't know exactly. Next up at 29th place, we have Kenny Golladay, moving to his new home of New York. Well, technically in New Jersey, I think it is, isn't it? I don't know. I know one of the New York games is technically in New Jersey. I think that's actually the Jets. Don't know where the Giants live, but that's okay. Kenny Golladay lives there, and he's going to be their top guy, I think. He's projected 14.8 fantasy points per game. That's a pretty good projection. I don't know why he's ranked 29th if he has a higher projection than all these guys. He belongs higher up this list, maybe like 20th. Maybe not 20th. Maybe top 25. Because with Daniel Jones throwing to him, I think Daniel Jones is good enough to get the ball to Golladay, and Golladay is good enough to catch the ball because Golladay catches everything, really. He didn't have many drops last season, and he played really well considering his circumstances in Detroit. So yeah, I think I definitely like this projection. 15 points per game for him seems very good, considering the rest of the receivers are on a different level. He's on a different level from the rest of the receivers, like Sterling Shepard and I can't think of the other guys off the top of my head, but they're definitely on a lower tier. Evan Engram might be a good tight end, but he's not going to be that long range option or that down the field guy that Golladay is going to be able to provide. And so I like Golladay a lot here. Bring him up a couple points, bring him up a couple spots in the rankings, and that's how I'd see it. All right, now we have Juju Smith-Schuster at number 30. Wow, this is an interesting player, is it not? 13.7 points per game is his projection for 2021. I disagree. I think it's going to be much lower, actually. He took a lot less money to stay with Pittsburgh. I don't know why. Maybe because he's waiting for the next offseason when the salary cap's going to be a lot higher and he's going to be able to make a lot more money with a new team. Maybe bet on himself, stay with the same system that he's been staying with. But I think he'll always be a number 2 guy. He's number 2 to Deontay Johnson last season. The year before that, he was number 2 to Antonio Brown. I don't think that Juju Smith-Schuster is going to be a reliable choice. Yeah, he might get a touchdown every once in a while, but he's not going to be that top guy. 31, we got T. Higgins, and I already mentioned him earlier. I think he's better than Tyler Boyd. I think he'll be the number 1 receiver on Cincinnati's depth chart. 13.7 is his projection. I'd go as far to say maybe 15 points per game is his ceiling right now on average. Yeah, I think T. Higgins is better than Boyd for the Bengals right now. Odell Beckham Jr. finds himself at 32, and this is one of the most interesting situations. He's projected 14.4 fantasy points per game. And if he plays for Cleveland again, for some reason I feel like they're going to have a revamped offense for him, but they've had Odell for a couple years at this point, and they haven't really done much with him, even though he clearly has some of the greatest talent in the NFL at the wide receiver position. If he was on a team that utilized his potential to the fullest, he might be a top 10 receiver. But with the Browns, what we've seen from Odell with the Browns, he's not top 10. He's maybe top 20, certainly top 30. I think that he's low on this list for 14.4. I think that's probably a fair projection of 14.4 points per game, but still, I think he's probably low on this list. There are several guys he's probably better than. I do think that Jarvis Landry belongs at a similar spot to him. I think that their difference in skill is similar to Jefferson and Thielen. If you remember from back then, I think that Odell's and Jarvis Landry's skill gap is similar to Jefferson's and Thielen's. But again, I think that both of them belong higher on this list. I think they're getting severely underrated, and that Cleveland is a team that other teams need to watch out for next year. 33, we've got Chase Claypool Mapletron coming from Canada. And he's got 13.5 points per game, eh? I think that's high. I really do. I mean, as the third Pittsburgh receiver in this list, at the 33rd position, we're getting way too much Pittsburgh representation. Drop Juju Smith-Schuster down and drop Claypool down, because Deontay Johnson is the top option. I think he's always going to be the number one go-to guy. If Roethlisberger can't get it to him, then maybe he'll throw deep to Claypool or throw short to Juju Smith-Schuster. I think Smith-Schuster and Claypool belong together, but they belong together below, like much lower on this list. Maybe around 12 points per game at most. Next up, we got Will Fuller at 34 on his new team in Miami, seeing the sun for once. Not for once, he's in Houston. Coming from sun to a better sun on the beach. At least it's on the beach this time. But his projection puts him at 15.4. He is suspended for a little bit here. I think it's a one-game suspension because he had performance-enhancing drugs, I think is what the suspension is for. I think he's only got to serve one more game, so he'll be there for most of the season. And I think that Will Fuller is going to be, it's hard to tell. I think he'll be in a similar spot as he was last season. 15.4 sounds fair. 34th place sounds a little low, maybe bumping up to top 30 receivers. But with Tua throwing him the ball, it's not going to be anything special. He will be able to make something of it, though, since there's not a lot of competition in the receiving position in Miami. So I think Fuller's going to be a solid option. Maybe not a top option, but definitely a solid wide receiver 2 option for your lineups. Wide receiver 1 in Miami, wide receiver 2 in your lineup. Michael Gallup finds himself at 35th. He's projected 13.1 points per game. What I have to say about Michael Gallup is that he's now the third Dallas receiver behind CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. And even though Dak's coming back, which will help everyone on Dallas, 13.1 does seem high. I think I'd drop him down a couple points, maybe to 11, probably 12 more realistically. Sounds fair to me. Drop him down a couple spots in the rankings too. He doesn't belong this high as the third option. Now I have Laviska Shenault Jr. at 36th spot with 13 points per game as a projection. And I really don't know how to feel about this because he's going to have Trevor Lawrence coming in, most likely, almost a lock at this point for Trevor Lawrence to come in. But he's not great, Laviska Shenault is. We didn't see anything special from him. DJ Chark, I think, is probably the better receiver, and so I might switch those two. You see DJ Chark a few spots below at 39th place. I think I'd switch Laviska Shenault and DJ Chark with each other. But with Trevor Lawrence throwing him the ball, I think 13 points per game is reasonable. Maybe high, but reasonable. Marquise Brown is at 37. This is the first Baltimore receiver we found because they just don't like throwing the ball to receivers in Baltimore, I guess. But for 13 points per game, that's very much so understandable. I'd maybe put him higher on this list with a higher projection of maybe 14 points per game. But yeah, Marquise Brown isn't anything special unless they change up the game plan in Baltimore, which they might. If they changed up the game plan this year, it kind of worked, I guess, but I think that unless they change things drastically in Baltimore, Marquise Brown's going to be at the same level, around 13 to 14 points per game. Next, we have Curtis Samuel at 38. He's on Washington now, apparently. I didn't know that. That's cool. Projected for 13 points per game. What I think about Curtis Samuel on Washington is that definitely changes my mind a little bit about McLaurin, but I still think McLaurin is going to be their go-to guy in Washington. I don't think that Curtis Samuel is going to change things too much. He's going to be, I think he's going to serve a similar role to that he served in Carolina. And for that reason, I think he's going to be on pace for what he was in Carolina in 2020. 13 points per game, that's probably fair. I just talked about DJ Chark at 39. Again, I would switch him with Laviska Shenault, put Chark at 36 maybe, and Laviska Shenault at 39, switch their projections as well. I think Chark is going to have a very, very good year with Trevor Lawrence if they can actually hit it off. If they don't hit it off, they're going to be in trouble. But 12.8 sounds very low. I think 14 at least should be his projection. Brandon Ayuk, we have at 40. I talked about him earlier with Deebo Samuel. I think that Deebo Samuel needs to drop it down to Brandon Ayuk's level, maybe put them both around the 35 mark, since they're going to be sharing catches, I think, pretty evenly. Like, they seem to be on a similar level where some games Ayuk would take over, some games Samuel would take over, but they both had pretty good opportunities, and so I'd put them both around 35. Ayuk's projection right now has him at 12.5. I think they should both be around 12.5. Jarvis Landry is at 41. This is crazy low to me, actually. I think Landry should be much higher, like maybe top 30, because his projection right now is at 12.2. Even with Odell coming back, I think if anything, Jarvis Landry gets more fantasy points than Odell. If not, they'll be at an equal level. I don't think Odell in any situation gets more fantasy points than Landry unless they change up how they play football in Cleveland, which they haven't. It doesn't seem like they will. And so Jarvis is probably going to be a top 30 receiver, maybe 14 points per game, maybe 15 even if he gets lucky. Now we have Jalen Reagor at 42, and Philadelphia receivers are something I just do not understand at all. They had that one kid, what was his name? Travis Fulgham. And he had a few games where he was just doing very, very well. And nothing really happened to change that except for the fact that Philadelphia just decided not to play him at all. And I don't know what happened there. But Jalen Reagor is also in that offense. And I don't really know how to predict a Philadelphia offense where Jared Goff is... Well, it's not Jared Goff. Who's in Philadelphia? It's Jalen Hurts, right. Jalen Hurts is throwing the ball. 11.8 points per game projection. I think that's fair. I think that's pretty fair for him. This is a solid spot, I'd say. I agree with this projection and placement for Reagor. 43 is Corey Davis, who is on the Jets. Okay, so I said earlier that A.J. Brown would be a top 5 receiver if Corey Davis wasn't around. He's not. I do think that A.J. Brown is going to be one of the best receivers this year. Without Corey Davis or Jonnu Smith, Ryan Tannehill is going to have to throw the ball to him. Or it could just bring him more coverage. Who knows? But I think it is going to affect him positively more than negatively. But anyways, that's not who we're talking about. We're talking about Corey Davis at 43 with the Jets. His projection currently puts him at 11.5. I disagree with this. I think he belongs higher, maybe with 13.5 points per game, if not more. And his placement should be at least top 35, I think, maybe top 30, because he's probably going to get the ball from Zach Wilson. And Zach Wilson is likely to go number 2 right now. We'll know within the week. Well, not within the week, within the week and a day. Well, not the week and a day. What am I talking about? The draft doesn't come till April 30th or 29th or whatever, but we'll know within the next month. And so I think that Davis is going to do well with whoever ends up throwing him the ball. As long as it's not Sam Darnold, he's in good shape. Cole Beasley at 44. I think this is a great projection for him. As long as Stephon Diggs is in the game, Cole Beasley is going to be a secondary. 11.5 might be low. Maybe put him at 12.5. But yeah, he's going to be a number 2 guy for Buffalo. And this is right around where the number 2 guys should be. Jamison Crowder, meanwhile, at 45. I agree with this placement as well. Jamison Crowder had some huge games for the Jets last year, even with Sam Darnold. And so I think he's going to be right there with Corey Davis at 12.2. Maybe bump that up to 14.2 or 14 flat. Jerry Jeudy, meanwhile, at 46. I talked about this earlier when I had Cortland Sutton. I think I'd flip the two. Or I wouldn't flip the two. I think I'd meet in the middle, where I'd bring Jerry Jeudy up a few spots. I'd bring Cortland Sutton down a few spots and switch them so that Jerry Jeudy is the top guy, because I do think that Jerry Jeudy is going to be the number 1 receiver in Denver this year. Why? I think that Jerry Jeudy has more potential, and he's got more to learn, and he's going to learn a lot over the offseason, and Cortland Sutton really showed all he's got, and it wasn't really that special. I think defense has got it figured out. Jerry Jeudy currently has a projection of 11.5. Maybe bump that up to 12.5. If we're feeling spicy, maybe 13. Ooh, no, probably not 13. Maybe 13. Yeah, let's max it out at 13. Now we've got Marvin Jones Jr. in Jacksonville. Okay, this changes everything. I didn't know Marvin Jones Jr. went down to Jacksonville. The fact that he went down to Jacksonville, I think that makes him just as good as DJ Chark. I think I'd bring him up with Chark and Laviska Shenault. I don't know why he's so low down here. But Marvin Jones Jr. definitely belongs right next to the other two Jacksonville receivers, if not above them. I think he's going to be on pace with DJ Chark. And if Trevor Lawrence plays how people are acting like he's going to play, he doesn't belong to... He deserves like a 15-point per game projection, 14-point per game projection at least. Right now he's at 12.1. Definitely bring that projection up a couple of points at least. And bring his placement up top to wherever the other Jacksonville guys are. Then we got Devontae Parker in Miami at 48th place. He's going to be... there's that other guy that went to Miami. Which one was that? I don't exactly remember. It was Galladay. Galladay went down. Wait, no, Galladay went to Giants. Anyways, in any case, Miami's got another weapon. It's Will Fuller. They got Will Fuller down there now. So Devontae Parker is going to be the wide receiver 2. He was a decent wide receiver 1. He's going to be an even worse wide receiver 2, but that's fine. This is where they belong. 12 points per game might be a little high. Drop that down to 11 points per game, and I think I'd feel more comfortable. But his placement as a 48th receiver, it's fine. I think that's okay. Now we got Darnell Mooney at 49th for Chicago. I don't think that any secondary Chicago Bears player is really worthwhile. 11 points per game sounds high for Mooney. Again, considering he's getting the ball from the Red Rocket Andy Dalton himself. So I think I'd drop his projection down to maybe 9 points per game and drop him in the rankings as well down to, I don't know, maybe a few spots, maybe a dozen spots, who knows? I don't really know. Anyways, Mike Williams, number 50. He's projected 11 points per game. I think I'd bump that up a little bit. 12 points per game, 12.5 points per game, maybe even 13 points per game if we're getting crazy. But as the number 2 guy behind Keenan Allen's going to get a lot of the touches, but for the touches he doesn't get, I think they're going to Mike Williams. He did very well last season for a wide receiver 2. I think I'd bring him up to one of the best wide receiver 2 options, I think, in the league right now. Well, I shouldn't say that because there's like Calvin Ridley, there's Adam Thielen, like I was talking about earlier, but he's definitely one of the solid wide receiver 2s, maybe like around top 40, top 35. I think top 40 is where he belongs. All right, now we're going to go on to a new page here. T.Y. Hill. Oh, my God. All right, I need to take a drink for those. I got water. I need to take a sip of my water there because T.Y. Hilton being at 51 is ridiculous to me. T.Y. Hilton should not be at 51. He's still as good as he was before last season. It's just last season they seemed to either be on different pages with Phillip Rivers or Indianapolis wanted to use him as more of a distraction instead of actually a pass catcher. But in any case, T.Y. Hilton is really, really good. I think that he should be projected 14 points per game at least and should not be this low at 51 on the rankings. He should be at least top 40, maybe top 35, potentially top 30, I'd even go as far to say. But yeah, his projection is far too low. I think that he's got at least 14 points per game next season, especially with Carson Wentz throwing to him. I think that's going to be a better opportunity for him than Phillip Rivers was in 2020. We got Mecole Hardman at 52. He's back with Kansas City. Re-signed a deal, I'm pretty sure. Projected for 10.8 points per game. I'm not really sure what I think about the secondary receivers in Kansas City because you got Travis Kelce and you got Tyreek Hill. But then after that, with Sammy Watkins gone, you got Mecole Hardman. Duncan Robinson, I think is his name. No, it's not Duncan Robinson. That's a basketball player. What am I doing? Oh, God. 2 hours in, and we're starting to go downhill here. But yeah, Mecole Hardman is like one of that lower tier players on Kansas City. I don't think that he's going to get many points most games. 10.8 sounds kind of high. Maybe 10 flat for him. Drop him a couple spots at least. Allen Lazard, I think, is in a similar situation as Mecole Hardman. He's in that second bucket of players because you got Devontae Adams. Aaron Jones is going to be a big part of the game plan. And then below that, you've got like all the rest of the guys like Lazard, MVS, stuff like that. And I think that Allen Lazard projecting 10.3 points per game is too high as well. Drop Mecole Hardman and Allen Lazard both a couple of spots. Now with Sterling Shepard at 54, he's getting a projection of 11 points per game. I'm not exactly sure how to feel about this because Sterling Shepard was the top guy last year for the Giants, but with Kenny Golladay coming to town, Sterling Shepard is certainly going to drop in that depth chart. He's going to be the wide receiver 2 on a good day. I'd say maybe 10 points per game is reasonable, maybe 10.5. This is a decent ranking here, decent projection, I'd say. 54 is fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. 55, we got Brashad Perriman going to Detroit now. I didn't know that. That's news. He came from the Jets. I remember seeing Brashad Perriman a few times. He didn't really do anything special at all with the Jets. He was just kind of there sometimes. He had a few good games, but that's about it. With the Jets, I don't think he's going to have much better luck with Jared Goff and a subpar offense. So I think this placement's fair. As a top receiver, which is kind of crazy to say on the Lions right now, unless they draft somebody, Brashad Perriman is going to be the number 1 choice for Jared Goff. And 11.6 points per game, maybe high, maybe 10.5 points per game, but in any case, I think his placement is right in this list. Next, we got Randall Cobb on Houston for 56th place. He's projected 10.5 points per game. I think this is perfect for him. He's going to be the new wide receiver 2 with Will Fuller moving out. And so, yeah, right around 56 sounds fair. He's still a solid veteran, very consistent, and I definitely like what he's got going on down there. If Deshaun Watson's back, even more points. If Deshaun Watson's not back, even less points. Next, we got Tyrell Williams on Detroit for 10.3. I kind of remember this guy from last season. I think, if I had to guess, I think he was on the Raiders. I'm not exactly particularly familiar with this guy, so we'll just skip over him. But we won't skip over him. But on Detroit, he's going to be their number 2 guy behind Brashad Perriman, or at least tied number 1 with Brashad Perriman, unless they bring someone in. So his potential is going to be capped, maybe 9.5 to 10 points at most. At 58, we have Julian Edelman, which is surprisingly low for Julian Edelman. He's projected 11 points, but I think he should be projected much more. If he doesn't get hurt again like he did this year or last year, he could have huge points and a great connection with Cam Newton. Now, we didn't see that connection in the beginning of last year, but that just might be because a lack of time, COVID taking over everything and sort of making it harder for teams to get their game plans or their scripts or their synergies together. I think that Julian Edelman is going to have a big year. I hope he will. And in that case, I think that his projection belongs at maybe 13.5 points per game. He's going to be the top guy in New England as a receiver for sure, hands down. And so I think that he belongs at 13.5 points per game projection and probably top 50 at the very minimum, maybe top 40. Next, we've got John Brown at 59. He's on Vegas now. That's also news to me. He did decently on the Bills. He was a solid wide receiver 3, and when he had to step up when Stephon Diggs was hurt, he did. He did very well in the spotlight while he was there. With the Raiders, he's going to be behind. Wait, it's not Amari. Oh, geez, I said Amari Cooper earlier. I'm realizing. I said Amari Cooper on the Raiders earlier in the video. Who's the Raiders guy? They don't have a guy. They lost Amari Cooper. Oh, geez, I'm living in the past. Oh, no. Anyway, we got John Brown going to Vegas. It seems like he's going to be a top guy there. 10.2 points per game is a solid projection. I think that's pretty fitting. If anything, maybe a little bit low, but with Derek Carr throwing the ball, what are you going to do about it? 60th place is A.J. Green. He's on Arizona now. I remember seeing stuff about that. I don't think that we're going to see like 2016 A.J. Green. We're not going to see anything near that. He's going to be similar production to what we saw last year, I believe, unless Arizona can bring something special out of him. 10 points per game, that sounds fair. I think he's exactly where he needs to be. Maybe bump him up a little more in the rankings if I had any feedback, but for the most part, I think this is pretty accurate. 61, we have Christian Kirk. He's also an Arizona guy. I agree with putting him right next to A.J. Green. I think I'd keep the two coupled together. Christian Kirk has 9.7. I think I'd equalize out those projections a little bit because I think as the number 2 receiver, well, I guess they're kind of tied as the number 2 receivers on the team behind DeAndre Hopkins. They'll get a similar amount of action. So I think they're pretty much the same in terms of fantasy. 62 is Russell Gage. He's on Atlanta. I don't think he's going to get much action at all behind Calvin Ridley or Julio Jones. His projection is 8.7. I think that's pretty accurate. He's probably high on this list, in my opinion. He should maybe be dropped down to 70th place or somewhere around that range. But, yeah, I don't think Russell Gage is going to have a huge year. Henry Ruggs III. This one's interesting because Ruggs he had high potential going into last year as one of the top receiver prospects from Alabama. But he drops to 63rd here because he didn't really have a huge year. He was good. He was really quick and pretty good on the long ball, but he didn't really serve much purpose otherwise for the Raiders. His projection for next year includes 9.3 fantasy points per game. I think that's pretty fair, actually. I think these are all pretty accurate, what we're doing right here. We'll keep going. Gabriel Davis at 64. He's going to assume the number 3 role now that John Brown is gone on Buffalo, and so is a number 3 receiver, 8.6. That sounds fair. I think that's okay. 8.6 points per game is good. Maybe 8 points per game, but I don't have any issue with 8.6. Josh Reynolds at 65. This is also... Oh, wait, no, he's on Tennessee now. I didn't notice that either. All right, so now at Tennessee without Corey Davis, behind A.J. Brown. This is going to be basically... I don't want to say the new Corey Davis, but he's going to be in a similar position. 8.3 points per game sounds kind of low. Maybe bring it up to 9 points per game. Bring him up a couple spots up the ranking system because he didn't do poorly in the Rams. He was just behind Woods and Kupp. Now in Tennessee, behind A.J. Brown, he's gonna have more opportunity. There's less people in front of him on the depth chart, so I think that there's going to be a good opportunity for Reynolds. I think he's relatively low here. We should maybe bring him up a couple points and a few spots up the rankings. Next up, we got Nelson Aguilar at 66th place, who's now playing in New England. He's going to be behind Julian Edelman for sure, maybe behind Jacoby Myers. Not exactly sure how that's going to work out. His projection is for 8.1. Yeah, 8.1 fantasy points per game next season. I'm not sure how I feel about this one because there's going to be... You obviously have Julian Edelman at top. I already told you how I feel about Edelman. But then you got Jacoby Myers. You got Nelson Aguilar. You got Bird, you got N'Keal Harry. There's a lot going on. You got Jacoby Myers. I don't know if I mentioned that. You got a lot going on in New England, and so I don't know who's gonna get the ball the most. 8's probably fair. It seems like Aguilar is gonna try to get into that number 2 role, and if he does, he'll probably get 9.5 points per game. But again, we saw how receivers scored last year on New England. I don't expect massive improvements, just somewhat. And so, yeah, I'd maybe steer clear of New England receivers aside from Edelman. I think Edelman's going to be great next year. 67, we have Michael Pittman back with Indianapolis. Again, I stated earlier, I like T.Y. a lot. Michael Pittman's definitely a lower tier guy. There's a pretty significant gap between the two of their skill levels, I believe. His projection is 8 points per game flat. Maybe bring it up a little. But again, we got Carson Wentz throwing the ball to him. There's not much guarantee there. There's a huge question mark. I think 8's a conservative pick. If I were to make my own ranking, I'd say 9. But it's not a bad pick at all. I think 8's fine here. 8 points per game. 68, we got Darius Slayton from the Giants. He's going to be sitting behind Sterling Shepard and now Kenny Golladay. His projection has him at 8 points per game. I also agree with that projection. So as a number 3 wide receiver, he did decently last year as a number 2, but as a number 3, I think it'll be similar, if not worse. Paris Campbell then at 69, nice. He's got 8.4 points per game, and I think that he's going to be behind Pittman, behind T.Y. 8.4 is way too high. Yeah, let's drop that down to like 7.4 at most, especially with Carson Wentz, as I mentioned earlier. Auden Tate at 70 from Cincinnati. He's far behind the other options, 7.8. I'd drop that down even further to maybe 7 points per game. I don't think he's going to have much at all going on for him. Chris Conley at 71. He's on Houston now. Projected 7.6 points per game. I think he's going to be the number 3 or 4 guy. I can't really exactly remember, but still, 7's fine. We're kind of getting into the trash players at this point. You think it's fine we switch? It's probably fine. Yeah, I think we could move. There's just a few other significant players I want to highlight. Sammy Watkins on Baltimore, 78th spot. He's going to have 7.6 points per game is his projection. I think maybe more. Sammy Watkins could step into a bigger role there. And then David Moore at 80th. He's number 3 guy on Seattle, 6.6 points per game. I'd say 7.6 points per game. Yeah, that's about it. All right, cool. We've made it to the tight ends at the 2-hour mark. Wow, we're almost there. Home stretch. About 30-something more players here, 32 defenses, and we're out of here. Hey, thanks for kicking with me this long. If you're still here, by the way, I doubt that a single person is listening this far. Because why would you? I'm nobody talking to nobody. Just listen to like another guy do it. I don't know, but I think I'm kind of entertaining. Yeah, probably, hopefully. I don't know. Why am I getting this existential stuff right now? We got tight ends to rank. Enough water. Home stretch, baby. Travis Kelce, number 1. He is obviously the best tight end. He showed it last year the entire time. 19.2 points per game is criminally low for Travis Kelce. I think his projection should be 22 points per game minimum. Okay, maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but still, he belongs at least 20 points per game, maybe 21 points per game, possibly 22 points per game for his projection. He's obviously the best tight end, and I don't think anyone even comes close to him. ESPN's got Darren Waller at number 2, 16 points per game. Yeah, I think that's fair. That's not over or under exaggerating anything here. I'm not sure he's the number 2 tight end overall. I think I'd put George Kittle there instead. But yeah, Darren Waller for 16 points per game. That sounds easy. That sounds good. George Kittle at number 3. I said I'd put it at number 2. He's got 15.7 points per game projection. I'd put him at 17 points per game projection. He's really, really good. I think he's the second best option here, which is why I'm putting him at number 2, obviously. But yeah, I think George Kittle is underrated here. His projection is pretty low. Mark Andrews at number 4, projection of 12.6 points per game. We see a huge drop-off here. I don't think the drop-off should be that big. Maybe bring Mark Andrews up to 13 and a half at most. But yeah, I agree that those top 3 of Kelce, Waller, and Kittle are on a different level from literally everyone else. Mark Andrews is kind of a transitional, where he goes like in the middle of those top 3 and the rest of them. But still, he's nowhere near the top 3 there. Maybe 12, maybe 13 points per game at most. Logan Thomas at 5. He's also a very solid player. I'd consider him on par with Mark Andrews, maybe a little lower. He's projected 11.8 fantasy points per game. And with that, I say maybe 12.8 fantasy points per game. Bring him up a couple points, but keep him in number 5. I think he's definitely a number 5 tight end. Next, we've got TJ Hawkinson at 6. With Detroit, he's going to be the only receiving threat there. And for 11.3 fantasy points per game projection, I think bring him up to 12.3 fantasy points per game projection at least, because he's going to be one of the only guys there. He's got Jared Goff thrown to him, which isn't great. But he had a good connection with his tight ends too, with Tyler Higbee and the other guys down there. I think that Hawkinson's going to have a good run this year. Not better than Logan Thomas or Mark Andrews or any of the top 3, obviously, but I think that Hawkinson definitely belongs where he is right now. He's a solid outing. Dallas Goedert, on the other hand, seems far too high here. Like, he had a few good games last year, but he might be number 10, but he's not top 10 potential. He's ranked number 7 here. His projection is 11.3 fantasy points per game. I think that it's maybe 10.3 fantasy points per game at most, maybe somewhere around 9.5, high 9s. I just don't think that he's got it. Robert Tonyan at number 8. I think he's got it. He's projected 9.6 points per game. I'd honestly flip the two of Dallas Goedert and Robert Tonyan, where Robert Tonyan gets 10.6, because Tonyan was just scoring touchdowns last year. He got like, nearing the end of the season, I think he got over a touchdown per game at some point. There was like a range there where he's just touchdown. And that's just money for fantasy football. So I think Tonyan's a great tight end option if you're not going to get one of those top 5 or 6. Noah Fant at number 9. We didn't really see a lot from Fant last year to indicate that he was going to be back at that 2019 level that he was at. But he's still good. I think he belongs where he does here on this list. Number 9 is fair. 9.1 points per game is also fair. Maybe 10 if we're feeling generous, but yeah, I think everything's right here. Eric Ebron at number 10 for Pittsburgh. I do not have faith in Eric Ebron. He dropped a lot of passes last year and did not do exceptionally well. The year before on, Indy, he did well, but he's just not fitting in with Pittsburgh for whatever reason. I don't think he belongs at 10. I think he belongs 15, maybe, top 15. In any case, I think that is too high for him. His projection should include something around, 8 points per game at most. He's just too inconsistent with the ball. Mike Gesicki, number 11, Miami's tight end. He's projected 8.9 points per game. That sounds somewhat okay. I mean, he's still gonna have Tua throwing him the ball the entire time. I'm not so sure how I feel about Tua. I'm not so sure how I feel about Gesicki either, but I think 11's fair for him. He's right around here. Austin Hooper for Cleveland now. He's number 12, and his projection is 8.7 points per game. If anything, I'd bump him up a spot or two, maybe in front of Gesicki and Ebron, if we're feeling especially on the edge here. Because he was hurt for some of the season last year, but when he was playing, like in those last few games when Baker started to get hot, alongside Baker, Austin Hooper also did very well. And it seemed like Austin Hooper and Baker were, when they were feeling it, they were feeling it with each other. Well, that's okay. Let me rephrase. when Austin Hooper and Baker Mayfield were doing well, they were probably doing well with each other. Okay, this is just getting weirder. Let's just move on. Rob Gronkowski, number 13. Signed him back with Tampa Bay, 8.6 points per game projection. He did a lot during the Super Bowl and some during the playoffs. But what I think is that for the most part, he's going to be used as a blocking tight end. I think 8.6 is fair because there are going to be some times where he's going to get that touchdown. But it seems like Bruce Arians and Tampa Bay have him in more of that blocking role for the most part. When they need him to step up, they will. But he's more of like a secret weapon more than a reliable tight end like some of these guys. Evan Engram at 14 seems low to me. He's projected 8.5 points per game. I'd put him in the top 10 and project him for 10.5 points per game. Before he got hurt, he was one of the better tight ends in the league, at least top 10 before he got hurt. And I think he's going to get back on that level. He's had a lot of time to rehab and, get back up to speed with everything. He's going to get back into a really good offense with Kenny Golladay there to take off some of the heat. Daniel Jones is back. Saquon's back. So I think that the Giants are starting to get the band back together. And 14th seems low. Put him up in top 10 with 10.5 points per game. Tyler Higbee at 15. He's projected 8.5 points per game, and I think this is exactly where I would put him. Maybe a little high, maybe a little bit. I guess it's not exactly where I would put him then. Yeah, he's maybe a little high for me. Maybe put him at 8 points per game with top 20 somewhere. But yeah, it's definitely not exactly. I don't think it lines up. He didn't show anything special last season. There's just nothing you can do about it. Number 16, Jonnu Smith with New England. I don't know where Hunter Henry is. Hunter Henry is much lower on this list. I think Hunter Henry is significantly better than Jonnu Smith on New England. They're both there, man. I think they're both going to do well. But I think Hunter Henry is the guy. Double tight ends on New England. They play well on the field, but off the field there might be some other issues, as we saw with that one case that shall not be mentioned. But with Jonnu Smith, I think that he'll still do well. 8.4 seems very reasonable. Maybe 9 points per game if I'm getting, adventurous with it. But I think he belongs where he is, and we should switch Hunter Henry up to the top 15. Hayden Hurst, number 17. He's with Atlanta right now. He's projected 8.4 points per game. I didn't really see much from Hayden Hurst last year. There were some plays, but not much to write home about. So this is probably fair. Maybe 8 points per game. Cole Kmet on Chicago. He's number 18 on the list. He's projected 8 points per game. Again, similar to Hurst. Not much happened with him. Maybe drop him a little bit, but if anything, there's nothing special really. Blake Jarwin follows suit at 19. He's projected 8. Just basically the same thing for Kmet and Hurst. Nothing special. Irv Smith Jr. I think that he's going to be a great pick, actually, Irv Smith. I'd put him in the top 15 almost if I could. He's 20th on ESPN's, but I put him on 20. I'd put him on 15 because he's projected at 7.9 by ESPN, but I think he's going to get a lot more, like maybe 9 per game at least, maybe 10. Because with Kyle Rudolph going to New York, I believe it is, Irv Smith is going to be the only tight end left in Minnesota. And when he was the only tight end, like without Kyle Rudolph doing much, he was doing pretty well with them. And so I think that Irv Smith is worth a look. Jared Cook, he's on the Chargers now. I remember seeing that. He signed with the Chargers in the offseason. He's in 21st place, projected 8.4. I think he's way too low on this rankings. He's probably a top 15 tight end, maybe top 20 at very least. But, yeah, Jared Cook did very well for New Orleans. Maybe not so much last year, but he did have a few good games last year. The year before that, he had a lot of good games. And it's the primary tight end on the Chargers. Just basically switch out Hunter Henry for Jared Cook. I think they're going to do similarly. I think Jared Cook's going to do similarly to how Hunter Henry did, which is very good. So put him in the top 15 for sure. Maybe project him for 10 points a game. I don't know. O.J. Howard on Tampa Bay for 22nd spot. He's projected 8.2. Again, there's a lot of tight ends on Tampa Bay. It's hard to tell the difference between them. I think Gronk is always going to be the top guy just in projections, just because he's Gronk. But O.J. Howard, I'm not so sure about. I think I'd skip over him because it's hard to tell. You got Cameron Braid and O.J. Howard competing for that spot, while you got Rob Gronkowski, who might get a point and he might not get a point. You don't really know. Next up, at 23rd spot, you've got Hunter Henry, who's now in New England. I mentioned him earlier. I think he belongs in the top 15 at the very least, above Jonnu Smith, because I just thought he was better on the Chargers than Jonnu Smith was on the Titans. Right now, he's projected for 8.1. I'd project him for at least 10.5, maybe 11, if we're being crazy here. 24th spot is Chris Herndon. He's the Jets' main guy. I mean, 7.2, not much to be said here. He had some solo games last year where there wasn't really there were some injuries on the team, and Chris Herndon was the only option, and he wasn't able to get it done, so I'm not so sure how much I trust him this season. 7.2 is fair, even with Zach Wilson or whoever it is coming in. I think 7.2 is a fair projection. Anthony Firkser becomes the primary tight end for Tennessee. He's 25th on this list. 7 points per game. Maybe a little more. Maybe 8 points per game. Because, again, without Jonnu Smith in the picture, he's going to be their guy. And when he was their guy last season, I remember Jonnu Smith was out for a little bit. Firkser was doing pretty well. And so I think 8 points per game is respectable. Bring him up a couple spots. Maybe 22nd, 21st, somewhere around that range. Jordan Akins at 26th spot for Houston. He's projected 7 points per game. I think we're starting to get into territory where these players are more unknown, more backups, and more, tertiary roles on the team where they're short range, occasionally maybe a few receptions a game. So I don't think these guys are worth talking too much about, except Zach Ertz, which is an interesting scenario. He's 29th right now on the list. Projection of 7 points per game. I have no idea what's going on there. To be completely honest, I have no idea what's going on in Philadelphia. They're going with Goddard as their primary for some reason, but I think Zach Ertz is always going to be that guy who's got potential to pop off. I think he might make a run this season if him and Jalen Hurts can sort of hit it off and get a connection with each other. But I do think that he's better than the 29th. I just don't. I can't prove it. I can't bet on it either. I haven't seen it all last year. We saw a lot of Goddard last year and not a lot of Ertz, and so it's really hard to tell right now. We'll probably just have to wait to see what happens in the first couple of weeks, and I think we'll know after week 2 or 3 if Jalen Hurts is going to Goddard or Ertz more. Defense special team. Here we are. Lovely. Okay, we've got Buccaneers ranked at the top, and I think this is wrong. I just think this is completely wrong. I don't think the Buccaneers are the best defense in the league. That's not what you think. When you think great defenses, you don't think Buccaneers immediately. When you think about the Buccaneers, you think about their offense, you think about Brady, their receivers, their tight end. You don't think about their defense. I'm not an expert on their defense. I don't know exactly follow the defense as much. I just know how well defenses do against my fantasy players. And Tampa Bay was never that kind of scary team. I don't think that they're an 8.3 point projection. I think they might be 7.3 per game at most, maybe 7 points per game for Buccaneers, and definitely not the number 1 spot. The Ravens, they could be the number 1 spot, but they did just lose Judon to the Patriots. They're currently projected 7.4 points per game. I think that's about fair. That's around where they belong. 49ers at 3. 7 points per game. I'd bump them up to 8 points a game and call them one of the best defenses in the league. Definitely top 3. They've got Nick Bosa back. They've got a solid defense. There were just a lot of injuries last semester. Not the semester, Jesus. Last year. I think that the Niners are gonna. I think they're gonna be a strong defense, a solid contender for the playoffs even. Just with what they're getting together on the offense, they're probably gonna draft a quarterback. Scary team overall. Their defense is also scary, so I'd put them at 8 points per game. Bills at number 4. They also have a very good defense. They're about 7 points per game. I think I agree with that. They're not really losing or gaining anything, and that's similar to what they had last year. Steelers at number 5. They also have a lockdown defense. 6.8 sounds kind of low to me. Maybe 7.5 for the Steelers. They were always solid. I think that's fair. 7.5. Put them up at least top 5. I think Patriots also belong in top 5, and you can't really have everyone top 5, but you know what I mean. Patriots are at number 6 right now. They should be moved up for sure. They have 6.6 points right now. They might trade Stephon Gilmore, but if they don't, they're going to have Stephon Gilmore. They're going to have Matthew Judon, like I said earlier. They're going to have a lot of good players coming back. They're going to have opt-out players, injured players coming back. Patriots are going to have a very scary defense next year, and I think that they belong higher on this list and with a higher projection. Same thing goes for the Rams at number 7. They've got all their players coming back for the most part. 6.6 points per game sounds low. They should probably be at least 7.6, maybe 8 points per game, similarly to the Patriots. That's a scary defense you don't want to run into. The Browns are a similar story. They're at number 8 right now, just to a lesser extent. I think that they're also a very good defense, 6.3 points per game, maybe 7.3 points per game they belong at. Potentially 7 points per game, but with Myles Garrett and the rest of the crew back there, I think that they're going to be able to lock down offenses and, really make them struggle. Colts are number 9, 6.2 points per game. I don't really know about the Colts. I don't think that the Colts are necessarily one of those top defenses that you'd be scared of to go up against or to pick against. 6 points per game sounds fair, I guess. Dolphins, same story. They're at 10. 6 points per game sounds fair. Saints seem low here at 11th place. Their defense was probably even better than their offense last year. So I think that their placement at 11 is rather low. They kept most of their guys over the offseason. I think they should be at least 7, maybe 7.5. Could be 8 points per game for the Saints. Broncos at 12. Their defense is pretty bad. 6 points per game is fair. Packers defense is also, I'd say, on the same level as that. They're in 13th place. 5.9 points per game is fair. 14th is Washington, the football team, as they call them. I think that's low. I think they belong above Broncos and Packers. They're currently projected 5.6. I'd bring that up to 6.6 with Chase Young in the gang out there. So I think that might be a little low for them. The Vikings are at 15. Their defense is bad. 5.4 might even be high for them. So I'd maybe drop them to 5 points per game and drop them a couple spots. The Bears defense at 16. This is an underrated defense, I believe. They still got Khalil Mack for the time being and Kyle Fuller. And they have 5.4 points per game as their projection. I think it should be more along the lines of 6.5 points per game. Next, we have the Jets. They're in 17th place. I mean, it's the Jets. They're drafting a quarterback that I don't think they have much. They might have draft capital. I'm not exactly sure about that, but still, I mean, 5 points per game. I guess they can have that. Titans at 18. Their defense is also very good. I think they should be above the Jets at least. So maybe bumping up to 5.5 from the 5 that they're currently projected. The Cardinals at 19. This is very, very low. They're at 4.8 points per game, ranked number 19. I think they should be at least 6 points per game, ranked top half of the league at a minimum. They just got J.J. Watt, and they're bringing in a ton of guys. They got Budda Baker still there. I mean, the Cardinals are going to be a great defense. I don't know why they're so low here. They should definitely be at least 6 points per game, maybe 6.5 or even 7. At least top half of the league. Maybe top 10 defense, maybe top 15. I'm not exactly sure, but I know that 19 is far too low for a J.J. Watt-led defense. Number 20 is Jacksonville. They're projected 4.8 points per game. That's fair. Same along the lines with the Bengals and the Texans at 21 and 22. I think they're basically the same story. All pretty low-tier teams with mediocre defenses. The Chiefs are at number 23, and by the looks of it, I think that's pretty fair. 4.6 points per game. It's their offense that really just scores points every single drive. It's not their defense really doesn't do much. You saw that in the Super Bowl. Giants at 24th place. They are projected 4.5 points per game. I agree with that. Falcons, Chargers, Panthers, all around 4.5 as well. These are all fair projections. I think these 4 defenses, Giants, Falcons, Chargers, and Panthers, there's nothing to write home about any of them. They don't really have many top-tier guys. The Chargers have Joey Bosa, but, I mean, that's all I can really think about right now. Anyway, moving on. 28th place is the Eagles. They're at 4.1 points per game. I agree. 29th, Seahawks. 4.1 points per game. There's really not much happening with the Seahawks. They lost all their good guys, it looks like. Yeah, I don't think that the Seahawks are going to be able to put up much of a fight on the defense. Raiders at 30th place, 3.7 points per game. Yeah, they're definitely one of the worst defenses. 31 is Cowboys. They need to draft some sort of defensive players if they want a chance in the NFC East. They're currently projected 3.7 points per game, the Cowboys are. It's the second worst defense. And finally, the worst defense projected for fantasy purposes. Let me start over. Forget that. And finally, the worst fantasy football defense projection according to ESPN's 2021 rankings and projections for the 2021 NFL fantasy season. I know I said 2021 a lot there, but still stay with me. It's the Detroit Lions. Motor City Dan Campbell led Detroit Lions in 32nd place with 3.4 points per game. They suck. They actually are bad. But that's okay. They'll get better over time, hopefully. I hope they do. Dan Campbell would be really fun to watch. But anyway, yeah, there it is. Almost 2.5 hours later. Everything, basically. All the relevant things. Oh, but that was interesting. Anyway, I guess I should probably do something to sign off here. I hope you subscribed. That was cool. If you stuck around this long, I don't know what you're doing, honestly. There are a lot of better content creators than me. For you to spend 2.5 hours on. Like, go watch a movie or something, for real. That voice is already gone. Like, actually, there's so many good movies you could watch, like Isle of Dogs, in these 2.5 hours. Like, come on. But anyways, if you're still here, I really, really, really do appreciate it. Like, I didn't think anyone would listen to this, and no one's probably going to hear this part anyways. But if you do hear this part, means a lot to me. Like, actually. It actually means a lot to me. It's really cool that anyone would listen this far. But that's just like a shot in the dark. No one's probably going to listen to this part anyways. But if you are, this has been Long Pick Nick on April 1st, 2021. Giving you today's sports projections. This has been the intersection. Oh, I don't even know my outro anymore. I don't even know where my outro went. I guess I gotta do an outro, yeah? This has been Long Pick Nick, the intersection for sports, data analysis, and speed. Thanks for watching. Nailed it.